Call to order the regular board meeting of the Directors for Ellison Butte Irrigation District for Wednesday, June 12th, 2024. We will begin with the invocation.
Yes. Dear Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for this day. We want to thank you for these men, Lord, that have come out and due diligence on the district, Lord. We just ask your wisdom and your guidance, guide us, Lord, to make good decisions. We ask that you bless them on their farms. We ask, Lord, that you bless them on their travels back home. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Mr. Heffling, please the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Before we get to the introduction again, I wanted to note one change to the order of the agenda. We have in attendance remotely Director Colquitt. Director Colquitt is in a time zone that makes it 11 p.m. where he is at. And so given that his committee is behind two of the contracts going to be approving, I'm going to ask to move items 8C and 8D to immediately after the calendar of events. Is there any opposition to that from the board? Hearing none, that change in the agenda order is made. With that, we have the introduction of guests. We'll start here with our friends from the Bureau.
Good morning, Larry Vasquez, Reclamation and Council Office.
Good morning, Ryan Serrano, Interstate Street Commission. Good morning, JR NSC, Office of the State Engineer. Good morning, Alex Ayala, Office of the State Engineer.
Good morning, Paul Pompeo, Stoddard Miller and Associates.
Good morning, James Arvasi, Getty.
Bruce Foley, EBID user.
Good morning, Dominic Fierro.
Good morning, Rose here.
Good morning, Anthony Paul, Mexico Department of Agriculture. Morning, Gavin Patino, International Water Boundary Commission.
Good morning, Nancy Bada, International Boundary Water Commission.
Morning, everyone. Samantha Stifler, U.S. International Boundary Water Commission.
Karen Byron, EBID.
Steve Hernandez, potential contractor.
Leo Barrett, I'm your minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Would you announce those on our remote connection?
Yes, Mr. President, we got Brenda Gonzalez, Delise Masil, Director Colquitt, Keith Dinos, Dr. Phil King, and MS.T. Leon.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the approval of the board minutes. We'll start with the minutes for our regular scheduled board meeting of May 22nd. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes as presented in your packet?
Greg, this is not on the minutes, but on this deal, it's got board of directors, it's got me as vice president, that's Randy Barai.
So real quick, that's from the audit report.
Okay, sorry.
And that would, I believe that would accurately reflect at the time of the closing of last year's budget.
I looked at it now. I just seen that going through there and I thought, oh, that might make Randy mad. It don't bother me.
But thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Lack. All right, hearing none, we have the special board meeting minutes from June 5th. Any corrections or additions to those minutes? Hearing no changes to the minutes, the president will accept the motion to approve the minutes of May 22nd, June 5th.
I move we approve the minutes.
I have a motion by Mr. Garai, seconded by Mr. Tharp to approve the minutes of May 22nd, 2024 and June 5th, 2024. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it, the motion passes unanimously. Brings us to the calendar of events, Mr. Essling.
Mr. President, on the 19th, we'll have an EBID special board meeting, starting at 11 p.m.
I had to go through my process to get where I was. So I look forward to continuing.
There'll be a storm coalition meeting on the 20th. The location will be determined later. On the 26th of June, we have our second monthly board meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock. In July, where the district takes off Independence Day, which will be July 4th on a Thursday. We have another flat rate, weekend schedule for the 6th and the 7th of July. We have our regular scheduled, July board meeting on the 10th. We have another, Stormwater Coalition meeting on the 18th of July. And on the 22nd through the 25th, we have a Western Water Seminar, NWRI, conference in Kennewick, Washington. We'll talk about that later in the meeting. That's it for the month of June and July.
Very good. While we've got the calendar of July up, I will note that I will not be present for the July 24th board meeting. I believe that, Mr. Roby Rosa also will not be present. We would ask Mr. Garai to conduct that meeting, please. I will continue to mention that at each board meeting when we go over the calendar. Any questions on the calendar? None. That brings us to our change in agenda, item 8C, the approval of contract for legal, the approval of contract for legal structure consultant, specifically for Mr. Steve Hernandez, followed by the same one for Mr. Keith Denos. Who's presenting the contract? Mr. Colquitt, are you going to be presenting those contracts, or do you have someone designated to present those contracts?
Hey Rafa, are you able to kind of take over on that one, partner? All right, thank you. Yeah, I'll be listening. If y'all need anything from me to chime in, let me know. But yeah, if Rafa could kick it off, that'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Colquitt. Mr. Rosa.
Thank you, Mr. President. The purpose of these contracts is to help us write an RFP and to get the word out and do recruitment for legal counsel. It has been difficult to find legal counsel for EBID in the past. Frequently, we would get one applicant or no applicants, and a good pool of applicants. The current contract is up for RFP, cannot be renewed as is. So we are looking for help from multiple contractors or one or more contractors to find the legal services that we're looking for. So we put out this RFQ and got a few applicants. Two of them could not do it due to time constraints. We ended up with 2 applicants. Is there any other questions I can address at this point?
So I have a few comments and questions. Are there other questions from the board before I jump in?
BK, this is John Fletchell. We talked about initially allocating, I believe, 10 hours on each of these contracts. Can you refresh my memory on that? BK.
You might have
A delay.
yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go, John. Go ahead and repeat that, partner.
I believe we discussed initially approving 10 hours for each of these contracts. Is that correct? Is my memory correct?
Oh, I believe we might have talked about it, but I don't know if it ever got anything further than just a comment, you know.
Yeah, I do remember we did not want to leave it open-ended. We want to keep a pretty tight lid on the hours.
Mr. Rosa.
Mr. President, Mr. Fletchell, I believe that it's up to the board to either delegate authority or set the hours, approve the hours for each contractor, and the goal is to find appropriate legal counsel. And if we need more hours, then the contract limits us at $30,000 per contract.
Now, in that case, I want the board members to realize we're not just leaving this open-ended. We want to monitor those hours. This should not take a real long time.
And I will also note that both contracts are limited to $30,000 each, with the total contract award being under the $60,000 limit for procurement.
Correct.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Lutz.
just something that I need to read in because there are potential multiple source awards to two individuals pursuant to MSA 1978 13-1-153 and 13-1154. The proposed multiple source awards were deemed to be in the best interest of the district to provide adequate services, specifically to provide both a local legal perspective from Mr. Hernandez and a more regional management perspective from Mr. Dinos. If anyone has any comments from the committee as to that, just by statute, we need to indicate reasoning as to why potentially multiple source awards.
And one other thing is there was 3 candidates, this go around, so.
Thank you, Mr. Franzoy. For my comments, first, I have mentioned on numerous occasions that I believe this path is a good idea. That hiring a consultant to help us understand the structural requirements for legal counsel for our irrigation district, to properly form RFPs that will attract candidates that can function in that structure, and then to recruit the best candidates that we can acquire for the district. I believe the process is good. It is different than what we've done in the past. And we've discussed at length how we have struggled to improve the weaknesses to how we currently had legal counsel structured for some time in Alpha Beach Irrigation District. Specifically with the contract to Mr. Hernandez. So I'm opposed to approving this contract, and I'd like to say why. So Mr. Hernandez has extensive experience with EBID and with reclamation. He is well versed and well respected in that experience in our industry. He has a tremendous amount of knowledge about attorneys available both in our local and the national area that could fill legal services contracts for EBID. However, Mr. Hernandez's firm and Mrs. Barncastle, who initially started her work with Mr. Hernandez's firm, are the way that we have done things in the past at EBID. And I'm looking for how it is that we do things differently to build on our strengths, but overcome the places that we've identified are potentially deficient. What is the benefit of bringing Mr. Hernandez in, given that that is his expertise? What is it that we are hoping to gain from his counsel? Mr. Rovirosa.
Mr. President. The committee believes that Mr. Hernandez's experience in the area and in New Mexico and the extent of his reach, finding and recruiting attorneys in New Mexico will be highly valuable, and his assistance in writing a good RFP will also do that. Those are the main reasons. In addition, Mr. Denos has a ton of experience. He knows people across the West, but he is not an attorney. So we were looking for diverse experience when choosing our consultants.
Mr. Clayton.
This committee has already identified several potential candidates for this position that we think are probably well qualified candidates. As y'all might surmise, it is difficult to find well qualified candidates for this position who are not conflicted. Pretty much everybody in the state who's really a really good water attorney has already got a dog in the fight. So that's been a problem. But we have identified several. I don't know if Mr. Hernandez will come up with any names we don't already have or not. But I think we need his help to write the RFP. He should be able to write that RFP very easily and very completely. And I think we need help in that area, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Clayton. Other comments, Mr. Garai.
I concur with both of them. You know, in our meetings, we need the help from the legal side and from Mr. Dennis's experience. So that's where we came up with hiring both of these guys.
Thank you, Mr. Garai.
Hey, Greg,
Mr. Colquitt.
I did want to mention one thing, I believe in the past, EBID's board has done everything in its power to, I would say, try to recruit or hire other people without experts. And from what I have gathered, it has not worked out so well. So, although you feel this might not be a good fit, I would like to take a moment and express that, truthfully, I believe we're going to need all the help we can muster up. So I'm in favor of this.
Thank you, Mr. Colquitt. Mr. Sloan.
I move to accept the contract for legal structure consultants for Mr. Hernandez and Mr. Dinos.
I have a motion on the floor to.
I second.
to approve Services contract for Mr. Hernandez and Mr. Danos, seconded by Mr.
I'll
Colquitt.
second. Yeah.
Your discussion. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Colquitt. To chair, the ayes have it. The motion passes 8-0 unanimously.
And just to clarify, Mr. President, for the record, Colquitt was the same time.
So, Mr. Colquitt, you were in favor of the motion. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's just a delay. I just want to add to the record, he was the delay.
Yeah, he seconded it.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Wait a minute.
So Mr. Colquitt, because of the delay with the remote communication, we just want to confirm you were in favor of the motion?
I seconded James and I'm in favor of the motion. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Colquitt.
Just in case anybody gets the report.
No, I appreciate that clarification, Madam Secretary. Okay, that completes items 8C and 8D. We will move back.
I just would,
Mr.
and I
Faisal.
should have said this when you asked for discussion, but I do want to I want to monitor the hours in both these contracts closely.
With an effort to limit them, is that the
Yes.
suggestion, Mr. Plato? So, there has been, is there any opposition to that? Hearing none, there's a request from the board to staff to work to limit the number of hours that are necessary to complete the legal structure consultant work. That brings us to item 6. The fiscal year.
Hey, Greg, could John, could we get a little more clarity on that? What exactly are you looking for?
I guess I would like to have, at least, this process should not take a whole long time. We had another board meeting coming up later this month. We ought to have a pretty clear picture by then, how many hours we're into and how much progress we've made. So that, a report at the next regular board meeting, which is whatever, later this month, that ought to certainly be reported to us at that time where we're at that point. This should not take very long to write the RFQ and identify. Honestly, the guys at the top of the game in water law know each other. And so it's not, you're not gonna sit around for a long time to figure out who this is. These guys should know who to call, see if they're interested and get it done.
Did that answer your question, Director Colquitt?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hernandez.
Yeah, in response to that, doesn't bother me at all that you want to limit the hours, but you need to look at the scope of work, because what you're requesting is not going to be done in 10 hours. So you're gonna have to eliminate some items on the scope of work, like the first thing you've asked for is a legal structure, a written opinion on legal structure of the district. And that's gonna take more than 10 hours in and of itself. Yeah. So if you want to start knocking some stuff off the scope of work, then I could understand, but the contractors are gonna need real specific instructions about how you want us to proceed and what you want us to do at the beginning, and then I think it'll work that way.
So I thank you very much, Mr. Hernandez. I appreciate that immediate feedback. As opposed to going into further discussion on this, what I'm going to suggest is that the details of that can be handled at the legal committee level and at the staff level.
the general guidance has been given from the board. So if we need to alter the contracts, that's a discussion for a different day. It is not agenda today. With that, we go to item 6, which is the fiscal year 2023 audit report. Mrs. Bureau.
And I stand right here.
We'll have you sit, you're welcome to sit at the table. You're also welcome to stand there.
Well, I don't want to have my back to anyone. If that.
Okay.
If this is okay, except I have my back. Oh, I'm sorry. You can sit right here. Do you want to sit right here? No, I think I'll stand. You have a very big agenda, and so we hope to limit our presentation. My name is Rose Fierro. I'm one of the auditors from Fierro and Fierro, who are responsible for conducting your annual required by statutory requirement, your annual physical audit for the year ending October 31st of 2023. We have completed that audit. The board, I believe, has had an opportunity. I don't see, I see somebody who has the audit report. The board has had an opportunity to look over the report, and I will certainly entertain any sort of questions that you might have during my presentation. We are required, or you are required, to have a public meeting presentation after the report has become public information. And so, and this is not your first rodeo. You've been through an audit before. You hire an independent auditor to express an opinion on financial statements. The opinion as an auditor, and as an auditor and as any auditor, the audit is not 100% accurate. We never so state that in any of our auditing procedures that we're doing 100%, unless you're going to get into a different type of an audit, which would be like a forensic audit. And so we base our opinion on what we call materiality. And the opinion itself is found on page 2 and 4 of the audit report. After all our procedures that we went through, we were able to express what we would consider a clean opinion. In other words, the financial statements that are presented here in the audit report is a fair presentation in all material respects of the financial position of Elephant Butte. Its statement of activities, its statement of financial position, and its cash flows for the year ending October 31st. So if any third party, a bank or a financial institution, a regulatory agency wants to take a look at your financial statements and make any sort of decisions based on the financial statement, as well as the board making decisions on the financial statements, one can rest assured that they have some assurance that a third party has looked at these financial statements and has so expressed an opinion on its fair presentation. Okay, so the opinion is a clean opinion. The audit report itself has what we call a management and discussion analysis, and it's about 5 pages or so. It follows the opinion, and what this is this MD&A. If you didn't want to read through the entire report, like what are they talking about? If you didn't want to read through the entire report, this MD&A gives a summary of what the audit report and the audit results were. That's the MD&A. Then we go into the actual financial statements themselves. The financial statements start off with what we call government-wide financial statements. This is governmental accounting, what we call government-wide financial statements. So in other words, you have different funds out there, and in this particular agency, you have two funds. Numerous agencies have a lot of different other type of funds, but this government-wide statement brings everything together. And it is on a full accrual GAAP basis. In other words, it has all of the debt, it has all of the receivables, all of the payables, all the deferred inflows and outflows. It captures everything, your capital assets, it captures everything in government-wide financial statements. Followed by individual financial statements. So you have basically 2 funds. You have a governmental fund for special assessments, and then you have your major fund, which is your regular assessments. So you've got your government-wide financial statements and then your fund financial statements. One can look at the government-wide financial statements, and we've reported that your total assets are approximately 63 million at the end of the year. Your equity was about 53 million, and so the difference between your assets and your equity is your liabilities. If you want to ask, well, did we or did we not have any sort of what we would call in layman's terms or in English, did we have any net income over our expenses? That would be a change in that position, which would have been found on page 12. And for this particular year, you did. You had excess revenues over expenditures on a government-wide basis of approximately 2.5 million. And my favorite statement is the cash flow statement. Cash flow statement was found, I don't know, approximately page, let's see here. Approximately page 19. And the reason why my favorite statement is a cash flow statement is because it gives one an opportunity to look at, to see whether or not you are actually increasing or decreasing your cash position. And I always looked at it that in any entity that we look at, if you're not producing cash from the core of what you do, then the entity is in trouble. Because if you don't produce cash from your operations, then how are you going to keep up? How are you going to pay your debt? If you're in a debt position, how are you going to make your debt service payments, which you're not? How are you going to keep up with technology and buy new equipment and replace your equipment and expand your facilities, expand your programs if you're not producing cash from operations? And in this particular case, this particular year, October of 23, you did increase your cash position by approximately $1 million and 1.1 million. So that's positive that you are increasing your cash position. After you get through the financial statements, we have what we call notes to the financial statements, disclosures. The notes to the financial statements help explain what some of the numbers mean. If you wanted to know, because they're highly summarized on the financial statements, but if you wanted some more detail like on the capital assets, you could go to the notes to get that particular detail. There's some other schedules that are required by GAAP and we have in the state auditor's office, and those are listed on pages, let me see, other schedules, pages 43 to 48. There's a schedule for like how much collateral you have in the bank for your deposits that you have in the bank. So that's the financial statements. Because we are governmental auditors and because this is a governmental agency, we have to do our audit under government auditing standards. And because we're under our standards, we are required to look at your system of internal controls. Internal controls are those controls that you set up so that it'll enable you to produce financial statements and safeguard your assets. We don't issue an opinion on the effectiveness of your internal controls, but we do test those controls. And if something comes to our attention in the form of a material weakness or significant deficiency, we are to call that to attention, to management's attention, and so therefore report it. And in addition to the internal controls, we also look at compliance issues. We're not attorneys, but we do look at state statutes like your attorney here, Mr. Les, just pointed out to you the procurement code, which is what she referred to as a procurement code with the state statutes. We look at the procurement code. We look at different items, and what we report is whether or not you're in compliance with those statutes or those regulations. As far as, and we call those, they're typically known as findings. What are our findings? We did run across a couple of items. The first one is in the internal controls. And we identified this as a material weakness because of the magnitude of the amount that was involved. During the process of year-end accounting and year-end reconciliation, there was $634,000 that was not handled properly in the prior year period. There's a point in time in your accounting system where you are taking information from your receivables and revenues from one system and putting them into another system. And your prior year financial people had set up this system where they were putting it in this account and deferring until everything was reconciled at the end of the year. Well, when they got to the process of getting ready for this particular year, they had left that part of that reconciliation out, or they had left that out of the entire process. And so the organization Elephant Butte did find the problem, they did identify the problem, and they corrected it and took that 633 and recognized it as revenue in the current year, when it really belonged in revenue in the prior year. And so in the prior year, your financial statements were misstated by the 644,000. And so we did an adjustment to take it out of current year operations and place it as a prior period adjustment. The second finding that we had as far as internal controls was the system itself, the accounting system. The Elephant Butte right now, or during this time period, ending December of 23, they utilize 4 different type of software programs to take care of the financial reporting. They have the TruePoint, which I thought, well, what on earth is TruePoint and why do you need it? Well, I was schooled and they explained the importance of TruePoint. Not only does it keep track of the receivables and the revenues that you already receive, but it does so much more as far as your water and your water usage and your assessments, and therefore cannot live without the TruePoint software. In addition to the TruePoint software, you also have Microsoft MS Dynamics that you're using, which is really the accounting software that keeps track of the debits and the credits and the receivables and the payables and the monies that comes in and the money that goes out, which had not been updated for a couple of years. You also use QuickBooks, which you're using QuickBooks to reconcile your bank statements, which means that in addition to having all this information in this QuickBooks, and taking it over to put it into MS Dynamics, then you gotta go put it over here into QuickBooks, all the revenues and all expenditures, so that I could do a bank reconciliation. Well, MS Dynamics should have been able to do the bank reconciliation for you. You really don't need to involve QuickBooks, because when you're doing QuickBooks, then you've got to get all the 4 software involved, which is Microsoft Excel, because you got to put everything into Excel so that you can put it into QuickBooks, so you can do a reconciliation, so that you can go back and put it in MS, so that you can do financial statements. And it's like very confusing and very, well, confusing for perhaps maybe someone that's not accustomed to dealing with different softwares, but you're leaving an element of the human person in there that could easily make mistakes, and something could fall through the crack in using all of these different software programs, as did indicate with this 633 that left off in the reconciliation process. And so the recommendation, when we do our findings, we give you guys recommendations, or we give the entity recommendations. We state what the condition was, we state what our criteria is for judging this, and then we give the entity, the agency recommendations on how to fix this. And then the organization has opportunities to respond to those findings and those recommendations. And so with that, there's a couple more on compliance. I'll invite Dominic up here. Dominic works also for the firm, and he was intensively involved in the audit process. And so he'll present their findings as far as the procurement code, the board minutes, travel, and the anti-demolition laws.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. Do you have any questions before Rose?
I'm not going anywhere. I was going to try to sneak out, but I'm not going anywhere. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Roby Rosa, President, what page are the findings on? Are
They start on page 51.
The findings, right after the report itself.
Right.
Thank you. I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, so as Rose mentioned, she mentioned the first 2 findings. You have 4 other findings for this fiscal year. The next one is on page, starts on page 55. It's item 2023-003. It's a significant deficiency. It doesn't rise to the level of material weakness, but is significant to the operations. This one is involving the procurement code. In particular, there was 2. We are required to test the procurement code when we do the audit. That is one of the compliance requirements as per the state auditor's office we have to do. So we test the procurement.
the lawyer, your legal services, and your professional contract in the engineering firm. During our review of those, we noted numerous instances of non-compliance, either with the procurement code and or the contract itself with legal services and the engineer. I'm not gonna go over all of the bullets. You see the 8 bullets on page 55 that continue on page 56 when you talk about the engineering firm. But it's just something that it rose to the level where there was non-compliance with the procurement code. Again, your attorney mentioned the procurement code already this morning. So you have to be, as the district, have to be in compliance with the procurement code. And these were all the instances we found concerning. Most of this was beyond the scope of work. When the lawyer was hired, Mrs. Barncastle, the scope of work said she's going to do this. Well, during the year, she did things outside the scope of work that weren't reflected in the board minutes. So it was beyond her scope of work. It was outside of her duties, and therefore it should not have been done. Therefore, the violation with the procurement code. The same would hold true for the engineering firm. The biggest one is when the management committee was formed. That was beyond their scope of work. Any questions on that finding?
Hearing none.
The next finding is starts on the bottom of page 57. It's concerning the board minutes and the Open Meetings Act. It is a long finding, goes for 3.5 pages. As we've read, your new attorney has provided experience concerning the Open Meetings Act. You are a governmental entity in New Mexico. You are required to follow the Open Meetings Act. It has to, the Open Meetings Act states you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do all of these things you have to do. When we read your board minutes, because that's the easiest way we can read what's going on in this meeting and within the district, you were not in compliance with the procurement, with the Open Meetings Act. You just didn't do it. You know, when does the meeting start? When does it end? Was there a vote? There was a vote, like for the vote you just had for lawyers. She wanted to make sure it was an 8-0 vote, and everybody voted. In your minutes a year ago, there was no such thing in your minutes. We don't know who was present. We don't know who wasn't present. But remember, your board minutes are your written history of the district and the organization. It's important that they're right, so that the people who replace the 9 of you have history to fall back on. The person who will eventually replace Mr. Esslinger has something to fall back on, the history of the organization. So that is what that finding is about. Any questions on that finding?
Seeing none.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Sloan.
On some of these instances on the open meetings and stuff, was it just not known? Or why wasn't these procedures like followed?
So, Mr. Lutz, would you like to comment on the district's opinion there?
My feeling was when I reviewed it and worked on portions of the response letter related to this, there were some technical items such as location of the meeting. We were of the belief, for example, by indicating the board members present, it just by negative exclusion indicated who was absent. Request by the auditors, which we're doing, by the way, we've already corrected that, as you'll see in future work. You know, we have worked on the minutes to resolve some of these technical items. And we reviewed other organizations, Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, Doñana County, kind of to see how certain things are done. We noticed they had some of the same issues, but we've incorporated some of those things to resolve those items. And I feel like when we look at this in the year ahead, we're not going to have these kinds of issues arise, or they will be much more limited. Mr. President.
This is Mr. Sloan. Yeah. No, Vera.
And to address that, because like we do the minutes, it's not that we didn't know, it's what has been done the last 20+ years, and never brought up before by a previous auditor. So stating all board members present, that's stating every board member is here, by stating if Paul Rath is absent, stating, assuming if you read it, you would understand he's the only one absent. It's what we've been doing. It's never been done by an auditor before until now, and no reason for protection.
So what you're describing is, did we explicitly list the names of the board members present? Or did we simply say all board members were present except Mr. Lack? And so it is a technical corrective request recommendation by the auditors. And Mr. Lutz and Ms. Salton Barrels have described the way the district is implementing that recommendation. And Mr. Brando,
I was just gonna add, James, in that report, you can see the cause of it and then the corrective actions as well. If you look below. For every finding.
And Mr. President, if I may, I would say, because there was a procurement, one of the issues of the procurement code finding was legal review of the minutes. And it was the opinion of the district that that is considered a legal service, and that is something I'm continuing to do. And it may be agree to disagree, but we do feel like with these items highlighted to us, it's important to have a lawyer assisting with that process. So I'm hopeful you will work with us from a process standpoint.
Correct, and as rebuttal to that, we agree. Reading the minutes is fine. But the lawyer shouldn't be typing the minutes either, and the law firm shouldn't be typing the minutes. That was one of the, but I agree with you wholeheartedly, Mr. Lutz, that yes, by all means.
I don't want to get into a back and forth discussion on the specifics of the findings were actually taken by the board. But that said, I do want to answer any questions of the directors that they have with regards to the audit.
Apologies, Mr. President.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the context, Mr. Lee.
Okay.
Dominic, I apologize. I don't remember your last name.
Fierro.
Fiera. Mr. Fiera.
It's okay.
No, it was not a terror.
All right then, on page 60, towards the middle of the page, the next finding is 2023-005. It's a non-compliance issue. It doesn't rise to the level of a significant deficiency or material weakness. It's travel. Mileage and per diem and mileage. In the state of New Mexico, Department of Finance Administration many years ago wrote the Travel and Per Diem Act. It gets modified every now. It used to be for the longest time, it was known as Rule 95-4. Everybody knew what that was, travel and per diem. So when the staff travels or with the board travels, there are rules. And then within your own board policies, you drill down a little bit, you kind of home ruled it a little bit. That applies for certain things like the case in point, the board policy says Las Cruces is considered local travel, El Paso is considered local travel because it's just right here. So part of the requirement, again, with the state auditor's office is to test compliance with the Per Diem and Mileage Act. There were numerous instances, we're not going to go over all of them, that there was non-compliance with the Per Diem and Mileage Act for board travel plus staff travel. So again, we've spoken, you'll see on page, I think it's 62, 64 is our recommendation, and then 65, bottom of 64, and the top of 65 is the response from management. And as Mr. Franzoy said, the plan corrective action. Any questions concerning travel and per diem?
Questions from the board? Hearing none, Mr. Bureau.
Yes, sir. On the last finding is 2023-006 on page 65. Other non-compliance, the anti-donation clause. In the state constitution, Article 9, Section 14 states strictly prohibits donations to individuals or governmental entities. The provision provides in pertinent part, neither the state nor the county or school district municipality, except otherwise noted, shall directly or indirectly lend or pledge its credit or make any donation to or in aid any person, association, or public or private corporation. What does that mean? You can't give anybody anything. In a nutshell. Everything, it's not, I can't, if you read the Article 9, Section 14, and I'm sure Mr. Lutz would have some thoughts on it as well. It said you, the board, I can't give me anything. You can't, if I'm an employee, I can't get a ham, I can't get a turkey. You're giving something of value without getting something in return. And that is not allowed by the state constitutions, not even in the statutes. It's in state constitution. We noticed various things. Again, we're not going to go over them on page 65. And then on page 66 is our recommendation and the response for the recommendation. Any questions concerning the anti-donation clause finding?
Questions for Mr. Piero? Mr. Rosa?
Mr. President. Mr. Piero,
Yes.
does county ever provide their board members with lunch?
We don't audit the county, so I don't know that answer.
They don't, Mr. Piero.
So,
I don't know, no, I don't know, we don't know.
so probably asking for a comparison of this audit with other entities outside the scope of the report. Mr. Claypool?
I was gonna say, you make this much go hungry, it ain't gonna be very picture.
I'm not making you go hungry.
So,
Good.
so,
Not me.
so to that, in the reviews of responsible officials, you'll see a discussion on that. Other questions for Mr. Piero? Hearing none, I will simply make a comment. I appreciate the thoroughness of the audit. Piero, I appreciate your time and your professionalism. We are always looking to improve the state of our entity. And we don't mind being told that there are places that we can improve. So management has received those recommendations, is working on ways that they can improve. We do have differences of opinion about what is in compliance and what is not. But in general, we want to improve compliance where we can. And I appreciate the audit this year. Thank you both very much. Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll move to our next agenda item.
From here, she had something. to say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms.
No,
Spear?
I was just gonna say, we appreciate the opportunity to have been of service to the district. You know, this is something that you are statutorily required to do is the audit, you know, and, we had no issues working with the staff during the audit. And we certainly appreciate, the opportunity that you guys gave us to be of service to you. Okay.
Thank you both very much. Bring us to item 7, water resources. Dr. King or Mr. Narvaez, who goes first? Dr. King, you're up.
Okay, can you all hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let me get shared here. All right, you seeing my screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, there are a few, the routine here, but I'm also going to throw in a little bit of background information on some of the dynamics of how allocation works and things like that. So please bear with me. This is what our storage looked like as of midnight on June 10th. We had 422,688 in Elephant Butte, 48,330 in Caballo. And that does not represent much of a change in storage. What's really happening is we released a lot of water since the last meeting, or I should say the May 8th meeting. You'll recall I missed the May 24th meeting. I apologize for that. I wound up with not only no internet, but no cell phone service. And there are still places like that. But what where we wound up was we netted about 59,000 acre feet between the June 9th, between the May 12th allocation and June 9th conditions. So the big difference is the release from Caballo, and that was about 77,000 acre feet since May 12th. Rio Grande Compact and Chama Water haven't changed much. Usable project storage at 465. The not releasable includes the dead pools plus water stored in Elephant Butte for Rio Grande Compact credit. That's Colorado's 145 acre feet of credit. New Mexico, remember, is deeply in deficit. So there is no storage water associated with that. And then 5,700 of San Juan Chama water leaves us. So there's 21,000 of that 465 that's not releasable. We have already released 233,000 acre feet. And this, we'll get to some of the numbers, but when you tell James to run fast and furious, you best believe he's going to do it. The seasonal supply, therefore, is 675. And you remember that 600 was a significant threshold because that's where Mexico goes to 60,000. We had our meeting on May 8th and then the allocation on May 12th. And at that May 12th meeting, or that May 12th allocation, Mexico did go to 60K. We're now getting about 600 acre feet per day. Last month at the May 8th meeting, that was about 3,700. So the spring runoff is just about over, and I'll show you some detail on that as well. The May 12th allocation, I did discuss this with the Water Resources Committee. What I did here was due to the way what we do is we come up with an initial beginning of the season estimate of the diversion ratio. It is an estimate until the end of the year when we use real numbers for release from Caballo and real numbers for charges to the two districts in Mexico to calculate an actual diversion ratio and an actual allocation to EBID for the season. Up until then, everything is sort of the diversion ratio is an estimate. And so while we do have an allocation, it is based on that estimate. In the April allocation, I used a 0.87 diversion ratio. What I did is I lowered that to 0.841 based on the way the system was actually performing through March, April, and the first few days of May. And what that did is it held EBID's allocation essentially constant. So this is the same as we had with the April allocation to within a few hundred acre feet. We went up by a few hundred acre feet, but nothing significant. So we do sit at about 12.7 potential. Our allocation sits, our actual allotment sits at 12 inches. And at this point, I do not recommend a change on that because EBID, I don't have full month of EBID release. It's definitely going to change things because, as you'll see, we more than doubled the release with EBID coming on. We have not done an allocation in June yet. We'll probably do that in the next few days. My intention is to lower the diversion ratio again. And the reason, I'll show you the reason in just a minute here, why we would do that. But remember that the diversion ratio that counts is the one at the end of the year. Another thing that I'll just take a little digression here to address is we use the actual diversion ratio to calculate the allocation to EBID. We use D2 to calculate the allocation to EP number 1, and D2 has an implicit diversion ratio built into it. The red dots you see here are the actual data points gathered from 1951 through 1978 for annual Caballo release on the x-axis and annual project diversion on the y-axis. And if you do a linear regression through there, you get the red line. That is exactly D2. So D2 says that if we're releasing 300,000 acre feet, that there should be a little over 300,000 acre feet we should have a little bit more than that, maybe 312, 315 of available diversion. So that's actually a diversion ratio greater than 1. And what the purple line is the diversion ratio that is built into D2. It's simply the value on the y-axis divided by the value on the x-axis. And it is derived from this regression line, not the individual data points. The purple dots you see are the diversion ratios calculated from the red points. And it's just the y-axis divided by the x-axis. And so you get this nonlinear relationship that goes to 0 at about 67,000 acre feet. What D2 is saying then is that if you release 67,000 acre feet, the river will take it all. This is kind of a mathematical artifact. It's an extrapolation because you see in the D2 data set, we don't have any release below 200,000 acre feet. So if you're going to run it down to 67,000 acre feet, that is extrapolation, which is not something that linear regression is good at or used for. So I put that in there as an illustration, but this is actually functioning in the operating agreement, this extrapolated zone, because we have been below 200,000 acre feet in the current drought. In 2013, we only released about 168,000 from Caballo. So when you do that, you see you get in this weird place where the diversion ratio is changing extremely fast. As you get incremental water, the diversion ratio goes up really fast. That doesn't necessarily happen in reality, but we're in extrapolation area here. When we get into the area where we are now, which is like in this 300,000 to 400,000 range, you see it starts to flatten out and behave itself a little better. So right now with where we are in this May 12th allocation, we had 309,000 acre feet of releasable water. So you see the diversion ratio implicit in D2 would be about 1.09. You read that off over here, 1.09. And what we're doing is we're allocating with a 0.84, which is down about here. So the difference there is how far the diversion ratio is falling short of D2. And that's why you see on the previous slide, EP1 is getting significantly more than 43% of the available water for this year's allocation, and EBID is getting less. And that's because our diversion ratio is basically falling below the diversion ratio that's built into D2. I would also comment that we are applying a drought adjustment factor of 0.996. So take D2, multiply by 0.96, and it will pull everything down a little bit, but still nowhere close to the 0.84 that we're looking at now for allocation. Any questions on that?
There are none.
Okay, I know what that means.
Well, I just got a quick one. Dr. King, so this is the first time I've seen the diversion ratio curve with the scatter plot. Those are the diversion ratios that are computed from the 51 to 78 period, the purple dots?
The diversion, the purple dots are exactly, they're exactly the diversion ratio calculated from the red dots. So for a given year, let's just take an easy one to find. This one, you see it's 360 release and maybe 300 and I don't know, 340 diversion. That corresponds to this diversion ratio here of just below 1. The purple line is calculated from the red line. It is the value of the line, the red line on the y-axis divided by the value of the red line on the x-axis, which is release over diversion. Sorry, other way around, diversion over release, the definition of diversion ratio. I don't do a regression through these points up here because it's bad form because you'll have diversion on both, you'll have diversion built into the diversion ratio. And it's also your dependent variable. And you don't want it appearing on both sides of the regression. So the regression is done with the release to diversion. And then the diversion ratio is calculated from the regression line, which is actually the way it works in D2.
Thank you very much.
I mean, it's the way it works in the operating agreement.
Mr. Roby Rosa. Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. King, it appears that we don't consistently get diversion ratios above 1 unless we're releasing more than 400,000 acre feet. Were the majority of the low releases later on in the D2 period? Well, were those 3 that are above 1 diversion ratio that are below 400,000 acre feet, are those earlier in the D2 period and then the ones below later in the D2 period after we've been in drought for a longer period of time?
Not really. I'll tell you right off the bat, this point right here is 1964, which is kind of right in the middle of it. A lot of these lower points are from the early to mid 50s. But there's not really a strong pattern. I will say that in the D2 period, the aquifer and the diversion ratio recovered more quickly than it does now.
So Dr. Fox talks a lot about the aquifer generally being stable if we have a 1 foot allotment. And that's kind of the tipping point to see a depletion or a recharge. Do you see a similar tipping point with the diversion ratio?
Well, obviously the diversion ratio is closely related to the aquifer conditions. And the aquifer conditions are closely related to the allocation to EBID. And so what we're seeing in the current drought is a couple of things. First of all, we do have higher groundwater depletions in the current period than we did 1951 through 1978. Not by EBID farmers, but by non-project water use. Secondly, in the D2 period, we had more wet years, or there were more periods where we had a few consecutive wet years where the aquifer recovered. Where here, 2019 was big and wet, 2020 was low, 2021 was low, 2022 was low, 2023 is back up. So we don't get that sequence of wet years for the aquifer to recover either. So it's those two effects, the lack of sequences of, sequences of higher releases, which did occur in 51 through 78, and the additional drag on the aquifer. Does that address your question?
Yes. Can we go to the next page? Or maybe it was the page before, where it showed El Paso getting 58%. 52, 54. So we had seen a 43-50, is it 47-53 split earlier on?
57-43.
57-43. We had seen that earlier on, hadn't we? I don't remember seeing these numbers exactly like this.
Okay, I'm not understanding the question. Can you repeat that?
Earlier on in the year, I remember that we had seen an allocation to EBID of 57% and to El Paso 43%. What made these numbers change so substantially?
I'll show you. That's an excellent question. It's all in here. That's why I put this in here. Okay. When we do start off the year, we've got very low releasable water, like below 200,000 acre feet at the beginning of the year is not all that uncommon anymore, unfortunately. And so you're on this really steep part of the diversion ratio. In reality, the diversion ratio would not drop off this fast. It's just that we're down in this place where there are no data. So we get below 200,000 acre feet and you're getting this weird artifact of this very simple linear regression. And in fact, the actual diversion ratio for some of those allocations is higher than the D2 diversion ratio. And if we're below 600,000 acre feet and our actual diversion ratio is higher than the D2 diversion ratio, then we allocate 5743. That's the effect that you're referring to in the early season allocations. In fact, it was also true in the end of the year allocation in 2013, because we just wound up so low that this mathematical artifact of the diversion ratio diving to zero very quickly below 200K gives us some unrealistically low estimates of the diversion ratio. So we wind up going 5743. If on the other hand, we were above 600,000 acre feet and we were above the D2 line, EBID would get the benefit and EP number 1 would remain on the D2 curve, but that hasn't happened. We don't spend much time above 600,000 acre feet. And when we do, we're always below D2 these days.
And so, Dr. King, my response to Mr. Rovirosa's question, and please correct me if I misstep. The two things that have changed since we saw it in 5743, releasable water has increased.
That's right.
The estimated diversion ratio has decreased. And those two things work together to impact the split of the water between the two districts.
Yes, that is correct. If I had if I had left the diversion ratio at 8.7 where we at 0.87 where we started out, EBID's allocation would be slightly larger, so we would be slightly more. But you can kind of see it as the season goes along, where we'll be off D2 and 5743. And then eventually there gets to be enough water that we've come up far enough on the purple curve that now EP1 is on D2 allocation. And I think that I hope I pointed that out. I think that was that this year or was that last year? Where from one allocation to the next, we went over that critical point by like 1,600 acre feet. And so we basically landed on D2 for EP1. But yes, both the increasing the available water supply for the current year's allocation increases the D2 implicit diversion ratio. And I did lower it to more accurately reflect I lowered the actual diversion ratio in the allocation process to reflect the actual system performance and hold us constant.
Okay, thank you, Dr. King. I understand. Seeing no other questions, please continue, Dr. King.
Okay. Now let's get back to the more normal stuff. This is what the river looked like as of yesterday. Again, the dark blue bars on here are the mean flow for, in this case, June 11th at each of these river stations, coming from Cerro up near the Colorado state line down to San Marcial at the head of Elephant Butte Reservoir. The light blue lines are the actual instantaneous flow. And instantaneous flow, it's just a snapshot. It doesn't reflect what's really the dynamics of it, but I'll show you that in just a minute. And then the red line you see there, read it off on the right axis is the percentage that that actual flow is of the average. And you see that upriver, down to about, below Cochiti, we're running about 50% of average. And then it drops off from there as we head downriver. And again, this is typically the way it works. Shortages of water get passed disproportionately downstream. And that is due just to the hydrology and the use of water along the river. And so you can see that we're running well below average, down around 25%, coming into Elephant Butte at this point. And again, this is not the net inflow into Elephant Butte. This is the flow in the river channel plus the flow in the conveyance channel. Not all of it makes it into the reservoir. Also, the reservoir is dropping, so there is a lot of bank storage coming out of the bed of the reservoir as it drains that flow into the reservoir. So we actually pick up some bank storage in the reservoir. This is just what's in the river at San Marcial. That said, this is the calendar year flows at key gauges, and I picked Otoe, Albuquerque, Bernardo, and then the net inflow into Elephant Butte. Now, this net inflow is not San Marcial. It is the release from Elephant Butte plus the change in storage. So it's the actual water that we have to work with, lumping in evaporation, precipitation, bank storage interaction, inflow, and outflow. All the stuff that goes on in the reservoir. And that's the black line you see here. So at Otoe, you see we were cruising along at about 500 CFS. Then Otoe started to come up, and eventually right here in early April, the spring runoff kicked in. It did its thing. Up, you'll notice that Otoe kicked in. Then you can see the lag time is that water made it down to Albuquerque, which is down there by Central Avenue crossing. Then Bernardo kicked in, and then it made its way down to Elephant Butte. I will tell you that if they had the ability to store water in El Vado, you would not see this nice spring runoff. Well, nice. It's still below 50% of average. It's going to be below 50% of average on the season. You wouldn't, there have been years when we saw no detectable spring runoff. But we did see detectable spring runoff, which is better than nothing at all. But anyhow, it comes, you'll notice it starts to plummet. This is because the snow is done. And this little uptick at the end here, that little uptick you see there, that's real. That was because we had a surprisingly good rain on Sunday into Monday. And I don't think you got it down in southern New Mexico, but it rained pretty good here. And that little uptick, there is a little uptick just starting this morning. These are daily data, so it didn't show up in yesterday's data at the downstream gauges, but there's a little uptick if you look at them downstream as that water makes it into the reservoir. The bottom line, though, is the area under the curve is the volume of runoff for the season. And the difference then between the black line and the red line is how much gets used in the Middle Rio Grande. It's a fairly clear way of looking at it. Net, how much is used in the Middle Rio Grande. You'll notice, though, that these are all dying off very quickly, and you can see where particularly Bernardo and Elephant Butte are headed. They're headed for zero, and they will be there before too very long. I expect drying to commence probably late this month or early next month, and it'll begin in that lower reach and work its way upstream as it did in recent years. Looking at the precipitation, again, this is for the water year. So this is the precipitation as of October. This has changed virtually not at all since last month, except there is no snow left up on the watershed. So when you see these river hydrographs dying, there's really nothing to prop them back up except the odd rainstorm, which produces a little blip that, maybe a day in length. Really nothing consistent. The downward trend will continue. You'll see that we are below average, but not too awfully much below average. We're going to be below 50% on runoff. We're not that bad on precipitation, and the difference is it's so very hot these days that we have a lot more losses up on the watershed. These are the final snow charts. The green line is the 30-year median. And you see that at the headwaters, that's everything north of the Colorado state line. We peaked out just about at median. On the upper, which is between Colorado state line and Otoe gauge, we had maybe a little above average, or a little above median, but pretty close to median. And then Elephant Butte did actually better than median. Unfortunately, this is Otoe gauge down to Elephant Butte Dam. This one doesn't represent nearly as much water as these guys do, just because the big snow, 80% of the snow 80% of the runoff comes from the northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, and so that's fine. It's better than median, but that doesn't translate into a lot of water. And you'll notice that they're all down to zero, so we're done. Looking ahead to I was looking at the beginning of our monsoon season time period. These are from May 16th, so they're nearly a month old forecasts, but I don't imagine they would have changed much. What we are expecting is below average precipitation, and this is certainly through the first 2 months of our traditional monsoon season, and above average temperatures. So what this is saying is, don't count too much on the monsoon. You never should do that anyhow. They're saying that we'll have a drier than normal monsoon season. My prediction is it'll either be wetter than normal or drier than normal. That's about all you can say about monsoons. It's really difficult to predict. I did not see the Sunday and Monday rain we had up here. Did not see that coming. The drought monitor is pretty much unchanged from last month. The entire state, except for this odd little circle out here, the entire state is something from abnormally dry, a little patch of exceptional drought over here in the Carlsbad area. That's pretty much unchanged from last month. And the monthly drought outlook is unchanged for the drought persisting in New Mexico. However, the drought development likely in the rest of the state is new. This yellow area you see in western New Mexico, that was not previously classified as drought development likely. So everything is pointing to deepening drought, and runoff, as you saw, is done. We're going to go into a hot, dry period here, and that's what our outlook in the coming months looks like. Don't expect much more water coming into Elephant Butte. The El Nino report was kind of interesting. They say El Nino is transitioning towards ENSO neutral. Now, I just know that last month I told you that we were in neutral conditions, but now they're saying we're transitioning towards neutral. You see the cooling is continuing here in the Eastern Pacific off the coast of South America, and they are somewhat softening on the chances of La Nina development. I believe it was up to 85% in the last month, so they're softening a little bit on El Nino. the model runs are, there's enough variation in the model runs that it's still kind of a crapshoot as to not so much when we go into La Nina, but, or if we go into La Nina, but when. And again, La Nina conditions, which we appear to be headed for, are generally associated with drier conditions in our area, but that's not a real strong correlation. Looking at the AOP, now this is an interesting one. What this is, let me refresh your memory on this. By the way, I do not include an updated forecast for the spring runoff at Otoe and San Marcial, because NRCS didn't publish one this month. And I guess they published for up in the northern reaches of particularly up in Colorado, but nothing from our key gauges, which would be Otoe and San Marcial. So there's nothing new there. But what these are is they take those forecasts from the NRCS, and the purple is the most optimistic. That is a 10% chance of exceedance. In other words, there's a 90% chance that the actual storage will be less than the purple line. And there's a 90% chance that it'll be greater than the red line. So the red line is pessimistic. The purple line is the most optimistic. This was made in May. And what I did is I went through, and I know where we are now. So I found where we are on these curves. And hang on just a sec. We actually fall closest to the 30%, which is on the optimistic side. We've got when they created this, we had a 70% chance of being less than the green line, but in fact, we're right about smack dab on the green line at this point. And what that indicates then is that we will hit Article 7 when it crosses this line. That would correspond to June 26th. Now, normally Article 7 is a big deal because when Article 7 kicks in, they can't store water. Well, they generally can't store water in El Vado for release later in the season. But this year they can't store water in El Vado anyhow because of construction. And that is going to be, we're going to be in that situation for some time at this point. So that has us going into Article 7. For what it's worth, that means usable storage of less than 400,000 acre feet on June 26th. And then the green line bottoms out, and this is combined storage in Elephant Butte and Caballo, combined usable storage of about 111,000 acre feet. And that would be about October 1st. So if there are any of you folks from the marine up there, if we have 111,000 acre feet, that's somewhere 90 to 95,000 acre feet in Elephant Butte. And that will occur on or about October 1st, according to these forecasts. Any questions on that?
So, Dr. King, the forecast has inflows starting at that point. Is there any flood storage that they're going to be sending to the butte that would reflect why there's inflows after October 1st?
No. As far as I know, they have no floodwater in storage right now. And the reason is because they have channel capacity to release it. So they do. And I hope I've got that right if any of the reclamation folks want to correct me, but there's no floodwater in storage at this point. So there won't be a big release like there was last year. There will be a much smaller release of prior and paramount water that they hold back in order to ensure deliveries to the pueblos. that's a lot less water, and this year they may use some of it. Their Middle Rio Grande, in other parts of the AOP, you'll see that the river flow, because they did not store any of that spring runoff in Elvado early in the season, they're going to run short late in the season. And by late in the season, I mean late this month or next month, they will run short, and you will probably hear about that in the press. The Middle Rio Grande will run short. If they do use some of that P&P water, prior and paramount water, that means there will be less to release, but it's not a lot of water anyhow. I think it's on the order of 20,000 acre feet. And if they use some, it'll be less than that.
Any other questions for Dr. King? What more do you have for us?
Well, just conclusions where our allocation is unchanged, so I don't recommend a change to the allotment at 12 inches. Mexico is at 60K now, so the suspense is gone. We're done with snowpack. And then we'll probably, as I said, go into Article 7 in late June. The 12-inch allotment, again, there's two things converging here. The end of the runoff season, there may be enough water if we, I will do a June allocation, and we will go up slightly. You saw we were at 12.7. We pick up maybe 3/4 of an inch, and we'd be up over 13 if you wanted to go there. But I'm not in a real great rush to do it. What I would suggest we do is revisit this at the next board meeting. So that's what I have for you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Dr. King on the conclusions? Mr. Glacial?
Dr. King, exactly how much water does New Mexico owe us?
It's 121 and change, I think. 121,500 or something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but on the order of 120,000 acre feet. And this is another thing. The fact that they could not store water in Elvado and are going to run short in the later part of their irrigation season is actually going to help their deliveries to Elephant Butte. You know how you like to see all that water coming into the reservoir for that period when it was? Well, they're not going to like that up in the Middle Rio Grande, but they are going, it is going to, I won't say it will not necessarily put them in annual credit range. It may, but it will certainly put them in a better situation than if they had been able to store water in Elvado during the peak of the spring runoff, which is kind of a dilemma for New Mexico.
Other questions for Dr. King? Seeing none, thank you very much, Dr. King.
Okay.
Walk my Ben Franklin's. Let me see. I think I need bigger reading glasses. These are not coming out too good today. Let's see. Where did I put? Oh, no. I guess I didn't take my report here. I have a handout. Morning, everybody. I'll try to keep this brief. I had given you guys a handout for the district report so far as of today's date. I don't have that report on here for some reason. Didn't show up. I'll post that here in a little bit because I got to go get it from a different file. But you do have the handout. Okay, what this is just giving you a snapshot of what's happening today. We'll start with the array. Total acres on order for the array canal are 2,636 acres. The Leesburg, 3,590 acres. East Side Canal, 3,277 acres on order. The west side with 6,445 acres on order. For a total of 15,000 acres currently on order. That's as of today's report. That goes along with the CFS of what we have on demand as far as releasing for Caballo. The array is at 295 CFS. That includes the river pump. So we're basically at capacity for the array. Leesburg is at 280 CFS. We just came down from capacity. We may end up going back up depending on how the demand looks there. East side is at 200 CFS. We're still not fully at capacity, but we're pretty close. The west side shows 435 CFS, so that's just New Mexico water. But we're actually releasing into the west side 555 CFS, which includes Texas water. So we're really close to maxing out on the west side as far as deliveries are concerned. You take those CFS numbers and it turns out to, or the total for that is about 1,200 CFS being released for EBID only. That comes out to 2,400 acre feet per day that we're releasing. I did a conversion there for you to show you what the CFS means in converted to acre feet. If we just take a look also just as the estimated budget that we put in based off of the 12 inches and the 174, the amount of acre feet needed for the array based off of those numbers is these are all estimates too. 33,636, we've already diverted 5,336 acre feet. Leesburg, 51,000, we've diverted 6,800. On the west side, 26,000, or excuse me, the east side, 26,000, we diverted 4,200. The west side budget is 53,000. We've diverted about almost 9,000 acre feet for a total estimated diversion so far as of the 12th. 25,000 acre feet diversion. That puts us on track, probably getting close to 60 to 65,000 released for the month of June. So we're on track of releasing about that much. I included a little graph there just to show you how our demand looked since the beginning of the season. We peaked out at about 19,000 acres total on order. That was on June 8th. Of course, that was during flat rate weekend. So those piled up because we're not reducing the acres since we started flat rate. But as you can see, once we started picking up irrigations, it went down dramatically. So right now we're at 15,000, but we did hit a peak of about 19,000. It's pretty high during that part of the season, but you can see we're starting to attack it. We do at about 1,200 acres per day on delivery as far as that. Quick summary on the flat rate weekend for the June 8th and 9th. We had a total of about 2,000 acres, I'm estimating. I can't say that every single one of them we were irrigating, but we did put water for the 2,800 acres. At a 6-inch charge, 1,400 acre feet is what we would attribute to that going to flat rate during the 8th and 9th. Not too many issues during there. Just typical flooding, trouble spots here. We did have some paid, not paid irrigating, which we'll be addressing them and take care of those with letters and let them know they need to come in and get paid before they can irrigate again. But all considering not too eventful. We did have the second or the final their reports of the ditch breaks. We did have a ditch break during the flat rate weekend right at the beginning, but we were able to fix that to keep us going. The array total up to date, matter of fact, last night we had ditch break, unfortunately. But we have a total of two ditch breaks, one on the Salem lateral and one on the Gonzales, which was last night. These are all both attributed to gopher holes in the area. Water had to be checked up significantly for irrigations. And for the Salem, it was opposite. It was actually a lower gopher hole. It busted to the bottom, cavitated, and then it collapsed the canal. As far as the one of the Gonzales, it was more of a higher gopher hole. We do have to have a higher irrigation there, and that probably would attribute it to hit one of the holes and it busted. We also, at the same day yesterday, we did have a cavity form on one of the other canals on the Rincon, but we were able to catch that in time. It didn't do too much flooding on there, so we were able to push it in and fill it back up. Leesburg, we also had two ditch breaks, excuse me. One on the Doñana, that was early on in the flat rate weekend. A significant amount of gopher activity in that stretch. It did hit it to a kind of a pasture field, but they contained it pretty quickly and got it back up to operation probably within a couple hours. The hill lateral also was a gopher hole cavity turned into eventually a break, which they were able to address right away since we had a way to divert that water, but we did take care of that. Currently, on order, as I stated up there, EBID's orders about 1,200. CFS, when you take all the Mexico, and you take the Texas water portion of it, we're actually releasing 2,500 CFS from Elephant Butte at this time. That 2,500 CFS also includes the river boost, which, you know, we keep talking about diversion ratio, and that's what that's impacted there. 400 CFS is not too bad, but I expect that to drop down. We did have to boost it up because when EBID came on, the banks started to take up some of that release. So once we start, I guess once the banks are full, then they'll start to give us water back. You'll see that number probably drop down closer to 250 to 300 CFS, which improves delivery as we go along. But overall, that's just a quick report for you. I mean, quick report of a lot of things going on, but if there's any questions, I'm here to help you.
Mr. Sloan? She said if I'm 15,000 acres or 15,500 is ordered right now.
Yes, sir, on
What is that? I mean, give or take, what do you think it takes to deliver? Like, can most guys in that 15,000, can you water that? How many days? I mean.
Well, we're pushing anywhere, for instance, this will show 15,000, but it won't show that we're getting 3,000 acres of a big farm, for example. So we have quite a bit that are on order. And the way that some of these bigger farms is it's stretched out over 3 days. So this is more like a snapshot. But like I said, we're averaging around 1,200 to 1,500 acres per day. If we never got another order, we would be done in a week easily. But when you finish one, there's already people putting in, planning ahead.
I didn't know if it was taking like McGower's water was taking an average of 4 or 5 days or 7 days to get your water.
Well, we're probably closer to about 3-day run maybe right now, because now after we get rid of the flat rate, the charge up and those kind of things, we're getting closer now to meeting where everybody's schedule's at. And I'll say this in the beginning of the season, hard to hit some of the schedules that are already planning because you guys are already pumping and doing you already have a schedule you're trying to go in there. So when we introduce surface water, kind of disrupts a little bit, and then we finally get on everybody's page and where we're at. And then right now is when we're starting to do our best work because we're able to meet schedules. Just in the beginning, it's kind of hard to get there with the flushings and whatnot. But yeah, we're doing about 12 to 1,500 acres per day, sort of numbers.
Other questions? I saw some other hands. Mr. Member Bicep, I want to commend you. This is an outstanding report, very informative. Thank you very much. You were talking about conveyance capacities for our 4 different conveyance systems. What is the current operational capacity for those 4 systems?
Let's say the array 280, we're at 280 right now. I included the 15 for the river pumps, but we're at 280.
So including the river pumps, we're at 295.
Yes, for the array, and that's capacity. Leesburg, we can't get much more than, we did hit 330, but boy, that was pushing it. I'd say 330 is our max, and we did hit that over the flat rate weekend. So right now we're at 280, so we do have some room there, 40 CFS. On the east side, pushing 250 is our max. Right now, we're stable with 200. The west side, this just shows you 435 with just an EBID demand. But when you factor in the 130 CFS for Texas, it's already at 555 CFS. We probably won't get more than that in the canal. Now it's just a matter of maneuvering water amongst units and demand, moving that around.
Thank you very much. This idea of lift pumps, I expect that more of those are going to be implemented in the district because of the efficiency gains that we get from having them. The array system is a little easy to include in the array because there's not another diversion point is going through. For the Leesburg system, we do have an amount of water that we're lifting out of the east side canal into the Leesburg system. When you're considering capacity, where would those fall?
Well, the way we did it is anyone that gets a benefit from those lift pumps from the east side, we've already moved those acres when they do place an order. It goes directly to 4A, for an example. So 4A attributes that to his schedule. So he knows he's gonna need 10 CFS, just like any other order. He knows I need to have this much amount of water for this guy. So he'll set in his deal there. Capacity, they're up at the top end. So they maybe to dip a little bit in the pressure of the dam and those kind of things where it doesn't affect it as much. But I think he works it in with his schedule so it doesn't.
So as an extreme example, let's say that we're able to put in 100 CFS of lift capacity along the east side to feed the tail of the Louise Creek. Would that need to come out of that 250 in the east side, or would you be able to feed those because of their proximity to the diversion dam?
We'd have to do something for as far as capacity up to that certain point where we do have the Louisiana and then going to the 28 check. And those stretches there, maybe looking at the design capacity, make sure we're always stay cleaned up and then assess that we can actually push the water in the upper reach and be able to check it up there. But 10 CFS max on some of these, on one of them anyway, maybe about 15 on another.
100 is extreme. Like,
Yes.
Like, I don't think the tail of the leaf break can take the 100 CFS.
Yeah,
I'm
no.
just trying to get an idea of the impacts to the various diversions from the plans of putting in lift pumps that need to feed off of their primary canal. And while the water's running, that's a good time to understand capacity and where we can go. That's why I'm asking the question.
Sorry. I would say, for example, Louisiana pump, we have approximately maybe about 200 acres, I believe, there that we can irrigate now. What that does to the Louisiana is big relief. So we're able to address others further up and not have to tie 20 CFS wherever long it takes to in that stretch. It's sending water. Same thing eventually when the California gets on deck, but that's out of the river, so it's a different story. We can do there. But yeah, it's definitely tremendous help on those things. It's just a scheduling.
And so to clarify, so there's 20 CFS for the Louisiana. There's some that goes into the Mississippi and some that goes into the Freudenthal. So let's say that there's a total of 50 CFS there currently. When those are all running, does it reduce the capacity of the rest of the east side from 250 to 200, or are you able to feed those?
I see what you're saying. We make another hurting the east side because we're helping the Leesburg, almost in a sense, like we're gonna push the problem from there to there. But I'm thinking.
We actually get an increase in capacity by putting these in near the diversion.
No, I'm thinking location wise, you're close to the dam, you're able to divert more up there. So you're able to, it'd be different if the pumps are further down where we had to send more, which would be capacity issues up on the top end. But if you're in the top end, you can hold more back and push more in from the top of the, from the heading. So the headings, the stretches where these pumps are at, we can hold more water there. So it's not as drastic as if we were pumping further down where we had to really push to get these guys the water.
So to be sure I understand, what you're suggesting to me is that there's little to no capacity impacts from these diversion points near the heading. The total capacity of the east side system.
There's gonna be some effect, but it's minor because they're part of their schedule now. They put them in their, kind of in their acres. It wouldn't be something where I'd see a big impact just because of their location.
If you're able to quantify that impact, I'm not asking you to do that during irrigation season, but it's something I'm likely to ask you after. And if you just have that in mind.
We've actually started doing that because we've been working on a procedure for this exact reason. Talking with Gary, we're looking at what other places could these pumps potentially serve. Now, what's that gonna happen? What's gonna happen? The whole thing you just explained right now. We are looking at that, but we'll quantify that for you.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Yeah.
White.
Greg, when we were up at Hatch, we talked a lot about replumbing, as Gary Hesslinger said, there's been a lot of efforts and design looking into those. And the quicker upstream you pull that water, the more that water comes out of that head, which gives you more ability, whichever way you want to go. But however that replumbing is, I think what we talked over there on the road, and you're talking down here on some of your issues, but boy, I tell you what, there's nothing that has helped us more than to have that 18 down there where we're at, because we were without it, we started this year. Remember, Gary, it was a week before we got water down there, because it was supposed to work and it didn't, and you're running water for 30-something miles that we haven't done in several years. So we ended up without any water for a friggin' week down there trying to get something wet, and that's just a pain right in the ass whenever you're already, stopping your dadgum pumping to get the canal water. You see, then you've done your orders, so what, you can't keep going, because you got an order coming, and it's coming down the darn ditch. So that replumbing issue is really important to get right, and doing it on the front end, as we talked up there at Hatch in different places. I think that's something that those engineers really need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lack. Any other questions for Mr. Narvaez? Thank you for letting me drill down on that.
Yeah.
Mr. Narvaez.
Just one more comment. This report here these are estimates here because at the end of the month is when we finalize numbers, maybe even weekly, we'll have final numbers because of the way the charts and the recorders and everything gets QAQC'd. So these are just estimates, but we're pretty close to this, just looking at the real numbers. So just to give you guys a heads up, but we're real close to this, but these are estimates. Okay.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Commissioner Levesque.
All righty.
Thank you, James. You guys are doing a good job for all the stuff that's going down, boy. You guys
Appreciate,
doubled up in your handling. Thank you.
yeah, we got a short-handed up there, so we got our night supervisor is actually working graveyard, or a day supervisor.
It's working out now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Brings us to our next item on our agenda, the general administrative. We have the financial report, Ms. Barber.
Okay, hello. For the end of May, the cash report is, there was cash in bank of 366,000. We had investments of around 8.5. That's because we sent some money back to the state treasurers to invest it. Our balances are still higher than they were this time last year, but as the auditor said some of this is attributable to, we had an increase in cash balance from last year of about 1.1 million. So we are still doing good, but we haven't done some of our large capital budgeted expenses. And we gotta see how we do for the irrigation season. There were no unordinary cash transactions in May. That's because the property of the Buenos Suerte Mesilla Drain property sale finalized in the beginning of June. So that property sale is done, filed, finally. And that's my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sloan.
I was just curious on this. I saw it's 90% of the assessments have been received.
Yeah, give or take.
So the remaining 10%, whatever. At this point, is it unlikely?
Actually, we sent out collection letters relatively recently, and with the start of the irrigation season, we are actually doing well at starting some collections.
So like last year, how much, if you can kind of recall, like how much percentage did not get collected last year?
I think it was around the non-collected was around 5% total.
So you might get another 5%.
Oh, I would say so. We're also going to have the suspensions because of the collection letters. So you may see some of those coming.
So typically I've seen it from the financial reports, I've seen an increase in collections once the water starts flowing, because you can't order it without paying your bill.
Yeah.
And so if you've been putting it off, now's the time to pay.
And Greg, something else in water gets short, those people who don't pay, they can sell their water.
Which also occurs, right? But you can't
Which
sell
occurs.
it until the tax has been paid.
That's
So,
right, so that helps, I think, I mean, I'm just,
These are all things that occur in the real world.
I see that happening all the time.
To follow on that, so is there any penalty for anybody to pay later on? So
Well,
you
they
pay
get-
January versus you pay June 15th.
Is starting February 1st, they get a 0.5% per month interest charge on their late assessments. And that builds until they pay 6% per year.
Should we match it to the current interest rates?
And that would be a discussion for another day.
Yes, sir. So that would be your penalty.
Thank you.
Anything?
Any other questions, Mr. Byram, on the general financial report? Hearing none, that brings us to item 8B, the sale of the Mesilla Drain to Buenos Suerte.
Yes, as I mentioned, that was completed, signed and sealed on June 5th. The claim has been filed with county. It is now, the property has been transferred. This started in 2019. It took a few years.
Is that closed on?
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions regarding the sale of the sea drain? And finally getting that finalized? Hearing none? When, Mr. Eslinger?
Through this ordeal of this sale, we've learned a lot of how we can streamline this in the future so that it doesn't take 5 years to get something like this done. But patience on the part of the buyer was extremely helpful, and then certainly just running through the gamut of state offices that you have to go through to get approval is something else that we weren't expecting would be as bureaucratic as it is. But we are working on trying to streamline this process.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Eslinger. Item 8E is the approval of the fleet management contract. Mr. Franzoy has told me that that item is not needed to be covered today. Mr. Franzoy, are you asking us to postpone that to another date? Or?
No, that doesn't need to be on the agenda at all.
Very good. So without opposition, we will not discuss item 8E. Hearing no opposition, we move on to item 9, the manager's update. Mr. Eslinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've invited Mr. Pompeo here from Sauter Miller and Associate to give his final report on completing the work that they did on the Leesburg Canal sewage break. So I'm the operator, Mr. Pompeo, that opportunity.
Good morning, Mr. President and board member. This is Paul Pompeo with Sauter Miller and Associates. Just to go back and make sure I don't miss anything. Basically, on January the 30th of this year, we had a break in a force main, or not a break. We had a valve that got stuck open on a force main line from the Rancho, from the Casadero facility on which utilizes a force main in the Leesburg lateral on January the 30th. Since that time, we have conducted cleanup operations. We have been in contact with the state environmental department. We have performed chemical analysis of soils, both within the lateral banks. I came before the board in March to update you on that progress. As of May 31st, we had completed our cleanup operations. And another major component to that was there was a section of force main line after conversations with your engineering staff to move a portion of that force main farther to the eastern edge of the lateral, and also to relocate some concrete vault and clean out structure to an elevation lower than that of the adjacent grade. That was completed on May the 31st. We are in the process of providing our final report to the environmental department, of which we will also make that copy available to Mr. Eslinger to close that project out as far as NMED is concerned. On the 6th of June, on Thursday of last week, at approximately midday, we were notified there was the connection within the valve pit that we had relocated and reconstructed had seeped. We were made aware of that around noon on that date, and by 5:30 that day, going on the protocols that we had put in place with contacts and getting Southwest Envirotech on board as a consultant, that was closed up, cleaned up, buttoned up, and completed in that day by 5:30 that afternoon. So I want to go back and reiterate that one of the things that we have done in this process was to identify contractors and people that could get out if there was ever an issue again, which that happened last Thursday, and it was taken care of immediately. I did finalize our operations and maintenance for that section of lateral, and I sent that to Mr. Eslinger on Monday of this week, outlining the operations of the line, emergency procedures, and a full list of contact numbers and names, so that if any incident ever were to happen again, that it can get taken care of immediately. So with that, I owe Mr. Eslinger the final copy of the report to NMED. One of the things, lastly, that we were waiting on was an as-built drawing of the changes that were made in the alignment of the force main line up by the Casa de Oro facility. And that will be forthcoming within the next 5 business days. With that, Mr. President, I would be happy to stand for any questions that this board may have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Pompey?
No.
Mr. Michael?
Did you get to meet a whole bunch of folks you didn't even want to know?
It's been a long process, sir. But I just want to reiterate to the board, we have taken very measured steps to make sure that these incidents don't happen again, including inspections, including periodic maintenance, including an operations maintenance plan, so people know who to call and to get a hold of, so that, God forbid, we're not anticipating anything happening again. We went for several years with no incidents, but if something were to happen, we will be on it immediately.
And we appreciate that. And that's why they call it an accident. Nobody saw it coming.
Yes, sir.
So Mr. Pompeo, I want to be sure that I understand what occurred on June 6th. So you had a connection seat within the vault that had been installed, and your procedures caught the seat, corrected it before it was able to escape the vault?
Well, actually, it was your staff. We were on site Monday and Tuesday of that week after the completed construction. And we were making sure that there was nothing. Your staff noticed a small seep coming out of the valve pit. So basically the valve pit over that 5 days, drip, 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 it filled up and then it finally came out of the top. But we were notified. I got an email with a picture and we jumped right on it and it was taken care of on that same day.
Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Pompeo? I appreciate your efforts to continuously improve the management of these sewage systems, emergency procedures, helping us to prevent contamination of our system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to add, just to finalize that comment, I did send Mr. Esslinger that document. I'd like to consider it a draft in his hands right now. And if there's any changes, updates, modifications that need to happen to that to fulfill any wishes of EBID, we'll be more than happy to accommodate that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Esslinger. If you have anything that needs to come before the board, please bring it.
Yes, it's under engineering right now to review and make sure that we've got everything in there that we want to state and protect the district as well as our constituents in that area.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just to reiterate, I do owe this board and Mr. Esslinger the final report that's going to NMED, and that will be finalized and provided within the next 5 business days.
I appreciate your presentation today, Mr. Pompeo.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Esslinger.
Yes. I mentioned during the, Mr. President, during the calendar of events that there is an NWRA 2024 Western Water Seminar on July 23rd through the 25th in Kennewick, Washington. And with that said, I want to know if any board members are interested in attending that. Normally, we do not send staff during the summer conferences. And we save that for the annual conference when we send staff. But anyway, I want to make it available and to the board members if anyone wants to attend, and then we can make those arrangements.
Thank you, Mr. Esslinger. And so to reiterate, we generally don't send staff to these summer conferences, partly because of expense. We go to other conferences instead, and also partially, we're extraordinarily busy in the summer. And so it's difficult to part with staff for a period of time for these conferences. That said, my understanding is Mr. Roby Russell would like to attend this conference.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, that's, I believe these conferences are very valuable, and I think it's valuable to see other water districts, meet with other managers, other board members, and I will volunteer to go to this.
Thank you, Mr. Roby Russell, and I appreciate volunteering because I don't want to go. They are not easy trips. There's a lot of work in them. So with that, is there any comment on that before I would accept a motion to approve travel for one board member to attend this conference? Not hearing any, what is the will of the board?
I move we approve Raphael's travel to the conference in July.
I have a motion from Mr. Sloan, seconded by Mr. Clayshall to approve travel for Mr. Roby Rosa to the NWRA summer conference in Kennewick. Mr. Franzoy.
For all actual incurred expenses.
For all actual incurred expenses. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, improving our motions. I believe that was the motion you intended to make, Mr. Sloan. For all actual incurred expenses. Any discussion? Madam Secretary, you have that motion?
Thank you, sir.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Anything else, Mr. Esslinger?
No, sir.
That brings us to engineering. Maintenance and projects updates.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
So today I'm gonna share a little update on the Hainer Cable project. A little video we put together. We had our pilot fly the project and give us a time lapse of construction. So as you know, this project was designed and built in-house. We took care of the prints, we took care of the fabrication, installation. And here is the actual video.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you screen share as well, please?
Yeah. So these videos, we're gonna try to get these done for every project that we do. These are flown with the drone. We have our own pilot here as well as others that are studying to take the exam for the licensure. This shows the initial stage. We only disturb the bank where the stilling well is installed. Here we are with the excavator getting it actually placed in the river. Fences were cut and replaced once completed. There you see some forms off to the side for the anchor blocks. Sorry about that. We have the rope in place to pull the cable once the frames are ready. There we're opening up for the anchor block to be formed and placed. Also looking into any music suggestions for the next videos.
How much concrete went in the anchor block?
Tons.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are 8 by 8 by 14.
Believe
Plenty.
It was roughly 48 yards total.
Per?
Each anchor block was 16.7. So total project was slightly over 48. Entire project.
Here's the final product. You can see our SCADA data collector out there in the cart. He's got his meter in the ground, and the next slide will actually show him in action. There he is, dropping the meter in. And this is the data that he collects. This is all on our EBID website. He collects efficiency loss for the north area. CFS, this is a daily record as well. And this is all what we want to put on the website along with SCADA.
That third bullet, 5-hour early warning alarm is critical for us to again, to manage floodwater once it's coming down through the river from the Hatch Valley. We have 5 hours to react and set our gates at Leesburg, and we'll see a dam to capture that water if we have floodwater. So this Hainer cableway is something that, it's probably one of the best facilities on the Rio Grande. I can say USGS probably would like to be in that site, just for the fact that it is in a straight area of the river. It's conducive to good measurement, just because of the width of the river right there. It's not that wide, and then the depth and the volume of water going through there, there's no hindrances, backwater effects. So what you see in that one stilling well is the telemetry that's being read daily. And then we also have Albert on the cable that double checks that as well. So alarms go off when floodwater hits that Hainer Bridge, that stilling well, and then we have that time to react and be able to utilize that floodwater down from the flood down.
Yeah, that 2227 CFS and 2237. You say that these are daily numbers. That's not what's running through. That was probably taken when just El Paso's on, right? Or is that?
Well, those numbers are in real time.
Right.
On our website. So
Yeah,
I wouldn't
that's-
say they're daily numbers, but.
What is it today?
That's from yesterday.
Oh,
Yeah,
right?
this is
That's all I
from
did.
yesterday,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, this slide was created yesterday by
Yeah,
the data
so that's
department.
what, okay.
Yes, sir.
I want to get in my mind kind of what.
Yeah.
They've already,
Yeah.
you've already taken out the purchase diversion.
Yeah.
So that's what's now headed to,
Yeah. Well, you know, I look at that river on the level, I live right there, that's right on my farm, so I look at it every day. And I get in my mind from 2 to 4, when it gets 4, it's really full. As you well know, Gary, and so at least I know kind of.
Thanks to you
Yes,
for
sir.
helping us get
Well,
the project.
I
done.
know.
Absolutely.
It's funny how that river, you can kind of see what's going by you. You get in your mind what, 2,000 CFS is a lot of water. Anyway, thank you.
Definitely is.
Other questions, comments from the board regarding the Hainer cable? Mr. President,
I wanted to ask a question to the board, what they think of kind of phasing out those engineering project videos. It was something that, I thought about for some of this IRA stuff, and I wanted to get your guys', thoughts on, do you guys like to see projects kind of phased out like this, so you can see all stages of development and kind of a time lapse of the project's development? Or,
so I see a nodding head from Mr. Rosa. I concur, the documentation of the video is excellent for these projects. We've seen this one constructed. Future board members understanding what does it look like to do a project like this. I think it's excellent documentation for it, so I would encourage it to continue. Is there anyone that wishes them to go away?
or any comments?
Is this on the website?
No, but we can definitely add it. Do we
Yeah,
put it on
it's
there?
not up there right now, but we can
We were,
get it up there easily.
we were gonna do, get a compile of, projects like this, that we're gonna post it on the website where you could kind of see all the projects going on. Leo, I know, is working on a list with Alex to get all our maintenance project lists on the website so that any constituent or the board can look at that and see, okay, where are we doing construction at? Where are our teams at? So that'll be put onto the website. It's in process.
I just want to make a comment in projects like these that are measuring water and the benefits of measuring water. We cannot manage what we don't measure. We can't manage what we don't measure. And it is our intention to be world-class water managers. And through improvements in managing water, we can make water. And so this is an important baseline step in, as an irrigation district, finding ways to make water. It starts with measuring it. So I appreciate the efforts to get this constructed, the grant efforts to help get it funded. And obviously our teams on the ground that made it actually happen. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Besides this, business as usual. Working alongside Leo, getting some repairs taken care of. Next month I'll have a clean report of projects down the pipeline and what we're working on for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to special use permits.
Good morning.
Second here, let me get set up. Would you like me to continue or do you want me to wait? Okay. Okay, so we have a total of 8 licenses, 3 are Quest. And those are part of Las Cruces water line construction project. And then we have, I'm sorry, Quest is part of the university project. And we have 3 for the Las Cruces, city of Las Cruces, that's an 8-inch buried water line. I'm gonna start off with the first 3, which are Quest, and like I mentioned, this is for a NMDOT project on University. So we have license number 2024 L02020 to construct, operate, and maintain a buried telephone line crossing the college lateral at approximate station 2825. Next license here, 2024 L048 Quest, and it's construct, operate, and maintain a buried telephone line paralleling the college lateral from station 2700 to 3300. And the last Quest license here is 2024 L049 Quest. It's to construct, operate, and maintain an aerial telephone line paralleling the college lateral from approximate station 700 to 3200. And that is all part of one project.
You would hold your presentation for one moment, Mr. Esslinger.
Sir.
Scott, on the first Quest, L020. Well, it seems out of sync with the next 2. Is there a reason for that? Like,
As far as the engineering job numbers,
yeah,
there's no reason for that. We actually received one of these ahead of time, and then Quest came back and sent us the others that they were like.
thank-
Because at one point, what they were trying to do, they were trying to include all 3 of these crossings on one license. So that's when I went back to them and let them know that, you know, each crossing would be a license.
makes sense.
Okay, the next 3 is City of Las Cruces water line project. The contractor's Crosstown Construction, and this is license number 050. To construct, operate, and maintain a buried 8-inch water line crossing the Bogey Spur Drain at approximate station 57. And this here is your construction area where the lines are gonna be moving across. You have the crossing here on the left. You can see it's paralleling the Bogey Spur Drain, and you have another crossing on the north, so the right side here. Next license, license number 051. Again, this is Crosstown Construction, City of Las Cruces, to construct, operate, and maintain a buried 8-inch water line crossing above Bogey Spur Drain, culvert pipe at approximate station 4575. And the third license for this project is license number 052.
Crosstown Construction, City of Las Cruces, to construct, operate, and maintain a 8-inch water line paralleling between the Bogey Spur Drain and South Main Street from approximate station 4575 to 57. License, next license, license number 053. This is Ludwig Farms and Ludwig, to operate and maintain one existing harvest gate on the east bank of the Chamberino Drain at approximate station 194 plus 50. And the last license we have here is license number 054, Pedro Arturo Jurado, to operate and maintain existing vehicle culvert crossing and flume crossing at the Del Rio Drain at approximate station 900. And that is our 8 licenses.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the board on any of these licenses? Mr. Roderosa.
Mr. President, why do we not have any of the drawings of the telephone lines or crossings on the boat drain?
The Bogey Drain, I can include those. What I did include is, this is from the contractor here. It's pretty much the route of the line. And that's what you see here, the crossing here, and then they have the 8-inch crossing along or parallel in South Main. I mean, it's not a problem. I can include those if going forward. I can include the drawings and all that if you'd like, but.
I will note that this board has not made it a requirement of the presentation to include construction drawings. They are sometimes included, but it's not been a requirement of this board. Is that something you wish us to reconsider in the presentation of licensing?
I would like to see them installed on the other, or on many other licenses in the past board meetings, so I would like to see them.
So it's really just certain sheets, cross sections of those areas right there. Yeah, that's not a problem.
Very good, thank you. Other questions on permits? Or the licenses, excuse me. I have one, it's the second license. LO4A, it's the parallel. I generally always give parallels additional scrutiny. This particular one, so my understanding is this lateral, if it hasn't already, is going to be piped as a pressurized pipeline.
Right.
So I am not familiar with us having any parallels along pressurized pipelines, and I don't understand the things I need to consider in these special conditions for parallels next to a pressurized pipeline as part of EBID system. What are things that I should be considering differently than if there were simply an open channel?
I think it matches up with exactly if it wasn't open channel, the way they would place it, the location of it toward the end of the EBID right away.
And I note that specifically the conditions require it to be 3 feet below the invert, the design invert of our channel or
The surrounding.
land, whichever is lowest.
Yes, sir.
And again, the idea there is if there is a breach, it's going to cut to the lowest point, whether that be our channel or the surrounding land. And to keep these utilities below the point that we would have cutting in the event of a water emergency event.
Yes, and so you're gonna have your pipe lateral, college lateral. On top of that, you will have a trail. So you will have that coverage, most of it on that, above that too.
I'm mostly concerned what happens when it breaches.
Okay.
When it breaches, where does that water go? What's it cut through? And, part of it makes sense to me that it's still gonna try to find its way to surface as a pressurized system. And so therefore it's the surface levels and the design invert of the system that matters. But I'm a farmer, not an engineer. I don't quite understand what's gonna happen when you have a pressurized system that breaches and where that water's gonna go.
Right.
Honestly, we probably have to look into that more, get with the engineering team and look into that further.
Mr. Barrett?
It would be identical to any public utility buried underground for the water main. So if you have a water main break that needs a fire hydrant, it's gonna be the same thing. It's all below ground level, it's all below street, it's all below street elevations. It's gonna be an underground pipeline like your water mains would be through any street or facility. So the water's gonna come up
Okay,
and then flow down the road. That's what happened.
thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Edsel?
From my understanding, it's really low pressure. It's not just high pressure.
It would be fed by.
Like you would have in a force main, low pressure.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions on any of the licenses? Mr. Ludwig, I believe you would want to recuse yourself. What's the license number? I don't have to list it right now. 053. Mr. Ludwig has expressed desire to recuse himself from consideration of license 053. I would ask the board to act on it separately. What is the will of the board with regards to that license?
I'm going to approve license 053.
I have a motion from Mr. Rosa, seconded by Mr. Garai to approve license 2024-L-053.
Yes.
Any discussions? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? I have noted Mr. Ludwig's extent. I have noted Mr. Ludwig's abstention. The motion passes 7-0 with one abstention. All right, with the remainder of the permit, what is the will of the board?
Does engineering recommend pass on all?
Engineering recommends approval.
I move we approve the remaining permits.
I have a motion for Mr. Garai to approve the remaining permits that were presented, seconded by Mr. Ludwig. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes to 0. Actually, is Mr. Colquitt still on the line?
No, it's not.
Okay, the motion passes 7-0. I note that Mr. Colquitt is not on the line, and I correct the last count to 6-0 with one abstention. All right. Well, I try to get this to send me back to the agenda. What's the next item on the agenda?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So we have the Government Affairs Committee report, Mr. Rosa.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me get to it. So the committee's nominated two non-board member stakeholder committee members and unanimously voted in favor of seating them, and they are Dino Cervantes and Don Bayan.
Seeing them on your committee.
They are on the other. Right. Oh, we met on June the 4th via Teams. Mr. Colquitt was not present. Okay, based on the current pool of, regarding the search for the manager, based on the current pool of applicants, is the view of Mr. Pauly, our recruiter, and the committee that the application process closed at the end of business on Monday, July the 1st. The committee believes that we already have a good enough pool of applicants to find a good manager. So if anybody else would like to apply, please get those applications in before the end of business on July 1st.
So it's the recommendation from committee to cease receiving applications, close of business Monday, July 1st. We'll start with discussion of that from the board. What is the opinion of the board on that recommendation? Is there any opposition to that? Hearing none, I will take that as an acceptance of the committee's recommendation to close the application period at close of business Monday, July 1st.
The committee requests guidance from the board on the following issues. Should the interview, okay, so there are multiple things about how we conduct the interview, how the questions are asked, how long the interview should last, whether staff is given the opportunity to interview that we need to discuss.
I think the simplest thing is to ask all of the questions that the committee had, and then we'll open it to discussion. And we'll ensure that we get each of them addressed.
The questions are, should the interview process consist of one interview, or should the top two candidates advance to a second interview? Same question, should the interviews be public or private? How long should each interview last? Should senior staff be given an opportunity to interview the candidates? And if the board concurs that 2 rounds of interviews be conducted and that staff should have an opportunity to interview the candidates, should staff participate in the first or second round? Should the 2 non-director committee members interview the candidates? Board needs to create a list of questions to be asked during the interviews. These questions should be approved by the board at the first board meeting in July. Mr. Pauly has sent a list of questions that I will distribute to you. Should the questions be provided to the candidates before the interview, so they're given time to prepare? Or should they not be given to candidates and the candidates be made to answer them ad hoc? And in the case the 2 rounds of interviews are conducted, should both sets of questions be provided? Just the questions for the first interview, just the questions for the second interview, or no questions provided?
Mr. Sloan.
So this first one I would address to David, on the private or public, is there an opinion?
So the Open Meetings Act, limited personnel matters, including hiring, is an exception to the Open Meetings Act. It has a specific statutory section. Judicial candidates interviewed by any commission shall have the right to demand an open interview, which by negative implication means that an interview process can be done in a closed meeting. The only point I make for the practice of this district was, I believe, the last time it was done open, and there may have been reasoning for that. I think there's always an encouragement to try to make the process as public as possible, but it would not be legal if you wanted to have the interviews private as limited personnel matters, so long as the discussions were only on those limited issues.
I think the only concern is some of these people that might be applying, probably all have current jobs. And so a few of them may not want to.
They don't want to publicize
Probably
that
not.
they're potentially looking for another job. And that is a concern in my involvement as legal counsel in the past for the city of Las Cruces and in New Mexico State University Foundation. We've had that come up in the past. That's why at times those items have been done in closed.
So just to reiterate, we can interview in both meetings.
In my legal opinion, yes.
Unless somebody requested they want to have it.
Well,
That was
No.
specifically for judicial.
that's
candidates.
specifically
Oh,
for
okay.
judicial candidates, that, the legislature has given judicial candidates the ability to require an open interview. Because of that, for others, you can have it be closed.
Mr. Rovirosa.
Mr. President, Mr. Pauly has strongly recommended that we do it in private.
So my comments on that in general, Mr. Lutz brought up how we've done it in the past. So previously, we conducted all of the interviews in an open meeting. We did one interview. After which the board alone considered the input we received in the interviews. The desire to do it publicly was so that it was not just the board receiving the interview information from the candidates and making their decision. If there has been a proposal to have other groups also interview the candidates. With senior staff at EBID being one of those proposed groups, a group of EBID constituents being one of those groups. And that those two groups would then give their feedback to the board from their interview process. So that has opened the consideration of these candidates in a way that is different, but satisfies a similar concern that we were trying to satisfy by doing the interviews publicly before. Those are the things I've thought about in considering this. I generally like things to be as open as possible. I think, especially if we're bringing other groups in to interview them, we have an Open Meetings Act requirement as an elected body. It starts to get questionable about how do you do public interviews with, say, a constituent group, or with EBID employees. I don't know that I find one of these particularly more right than the other. But the idea of doing them privately, having multiple groups interview them is different than we've done in the past, and hopefully can help us come to even better hiring selections. All right,
Mr. President, I'm just kind of thinking about what James said, that the more people you're involved, the more people you end up talking. And potential candidates that are already currently employed may not feel real comfortable with that.
Well, James, I think on a better hand is we're asking Mr. Polly's advice, who knows more than we do, whether or not they are embarrassed or have any kind of concessions about, you know, if they apply for a job, I think that's part of the job. And if we make the rules, you just gotta follow. But the fact is that we've asked Mr. Polly for advice, and he says he strongly suggests to do this privately. He knows more than I do. I would take his advice on that, in my opinion.
Kind of how I see it too.
It's just my opinion.
so I appear to be seeing consensus from the board that that set the interview process up as a closed interview.
Absolutely.
Is there any dissent? All right, hearing none, that is one answer from the board on committee's questions. The next question. Do you want to do one interview or do you want to do two? It is common to have final candidates be given the second interview. We are expecting to have 5 candidates for the first interview. It is the general. It was the consideration of the committee that it would be narrowed to 2 candidates if there was a second interview. I open that up to discussion with the board. Mr. Roby Rosa.
Mr. President, in my experience, for my business, I always interview people twice. Usually more than twice, but 2 in-person interviews. The first being shorter and the second being longer, and being more focused on vision for their position. So to get the vision from 5 candidates is going to take a long time. And we can pretty effectively choose who our top 2 candidates are and then do in-depth interviews, see their vision for the district. At a second date. Mr. Ludwig.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common practice. Second interview, we find, I know school districts do, I think businesses, I think it's pretty common for a reason.
Mr. Sloan.
Monica was gonna be, I believe our committee suggested too, so they everybody else that's not on the committee understood that we, I think, suggested two interviews.
Correct. It was the consensus of the committee that 2 interviews was the right process. Mr. Glacial.
It just seems to me like the second interview is a good idea, because it gives you time to think about what they said in the first interview. Then see what follow-up questions you have, where do you want to go in depth more, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Glacial. And I agree, my thought in the dual interview process was that the first interview would help us to understand, do they have the skills, experience, temperament to be the manager of the district? And then the second interview is, what's your vision for how we move the district into the future? And then help us to understand how they would implement their skill, experience, temperament to move the district forward. All right, so what I'm hearing is a desire to do 2 interviews. Mr. Tharp, no, you concur. Is there any dissent to doing 2 interviews? I see none, so we are to 2 interviews. Is that the right ratio to start with 5 and the second interview with 2? Or is there somebody that feels differently about that? Mr. Ludwig.
Question. Say after the first round of interview, you think one of them is a slam dunk, you need a second round.
I brought that up to the committee because I kind of thought the same thing. That could be, potential. I think you kind of mentioned that still just go ahead and bring the top 2 back and just, maybe I guess it would solidify your, maybe.
Yeah, it's possible when you get into a discussion of vision, that the person who seemed like a slam dunk, that you change your mind when you hear their vision for the district. Mr. Lutz.
Mr. President, my feeling would be to decide on the second interviews to still go with them. My fear on the thought of, well, we've made our decision is that there is a point of emphasis right now with the state of New Mexico looking at the hiring of managers, so to speak. Bernalillo County manager, Bernalillo County was criticized for engaging in a process that had rolling quorum. This related to having a committee reviewing it. They came to the open meeting with the committee selections already in place. Eastern New Mexico University did not make their final decision in an open meeting. The city of Las Cruces is currently under scrutiny as to its selection as city manager. That's still an open question as to whether they made the final decision in a closed meeting. Just had it as a formality and it came back to an open meeting. So I think if you have a process set today for 2 interviews, I think the best approach and best practice is to have all the interviews so that you're making the final decision in the open meeting. From the Open Meetings Act, even if people from the first interview process clearly feel individually, without discussing it amongst themselves, very favorable to one candidate.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz. Mr. Rovirosa. Mr. President, in addition to suggesting 2 interviews, there are dates here. And in speaking with Mr. Pauling and with the committee, the committee suggests August 1st and August 2nd interview date. First and second. So let me resolve the first question. So I have consensus from the board to do 2 interviews. Where the second interview will be the top 2 candidates.
Correct.
Yeah. Very good. If I may, Mr. Rovirosa, before we get to the dates, let's talk about the interview process and who's going to interview the candidates. Do we want only the board interviewing the candidates, or do we want to open the interview process to allow feedback from, potentially senior staff of EBID, potentially constituents of EBID?
I believe you need to have the staff of EBID involved.
I believe that was you believe to be involved with staff at EBID. Yeah. Mr. Sloan.
Do you think first interview, second interview?
Probably the first, because they need to get a feel for their vision as well from the first.
And allow them to offer feedback.
They'll get the decision, we need everybody's input, they've been here longer than we have. Some of the things they might see some things that we don't.
Other thoughts on that? So let's just, first of all, is there any opposition to staff having an interview process with the candidates?
A very limited number of staff, senior staff, whatever, I'm not sure who senior staff. is.
Presumably, it would not be all 70+ employees.
That's very, very strong.
So, Mr. Ethlinger, what's your feedback on that?
I think, I go along with, Director Garai. You know, staff would have to be working with this gentleman or lady, every day. And so it's good to have their knowledge and input as to which candidate may fit in the realm of what they do every day. And so I think it's important that staff attend at least the first, interview, and then give feedback from those interviews to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Ethlinger. Mr. Robirosa.
Mr. President, I'm very in favor of staff interviewing candidates. I do believe that the first interview is the correct place to do it. And I believe that having staff buy-in is important.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Let me ask you a question from mine. So in these interviews, would you also have Dino and Don by?
That's another question that we'll get
Thank
to
you.
after this.
Thanks.
All right. So I seem to be having consensus that an interview process that includes staff at the first interview level is the desire of the board.
I believe it is. You want a motion for that?
No, no, the answering these questions is just approving the recommendation and the committee will implement. All right, I'm not hearing any dissent on that. And I believe Mr. Rosa is documenting this for committee and of course, Madam Secretary for the minutes. The next question is an interview process that includes members of the district. Mr. Claysville mentioned Mr. Bayad and Mr. Cervantes, which are committee members of the Government Affairs Committee. Do we wish to include input from members of the district? And if so, how do we wish to do that? Mr. Sloan.
I would suggest they be involved in both interview processes and allowed to give feedback. I know from Mr. Cervantes' experience, he has a lot of experience at the university and has been involved in a lot of hiring processes, so I think should be very valuable for us.
Mr. Rosa.
I would like to ask Mr. Lutz how he believes that we can involve stakeholder members.
Mr. Lutz, not to put you on the spot, but there you go.
It's okay. I believe you can invite people to closed meetings. You determine who is in the closed meeting and who isn't. In that respect, if you wanted to have Mr. Cervantes and Mr. Bayad and it was a closed meeting interview, you could do that.
So is it the desire of the board to include the two constituent committee members of the Government Affairs Committee to participate in the board's interview process or something else?
I'm in favor of including them in the interview process.
Okay. Is there anyone that is opposed to simply including them in the board's interview process? So that they would be here.
Unless it's one.
Very good. So it is the then consensus of the board to include the Government Affairs constituent committee members in the board's interview process for both the first and the second interview. All right, dates. So for the first interview, there are two interviews that the candidates need to go through. One with the board, one with the staff of EBID. After which, staff has to have an opportunity to present to the board their feedback on the interview process. With that understanding, let's talk about dates and the process.
Mr. Sloan, maybe I'm a little confused. I thought the staff would be present for that interview. We're gonna have separate interviews?
That was my understanding, yes. The staff would interview them separately.
Okay.
Could I?
Mr. Polly had,
Okay,
I'm confused on that.
very good. Then let's discuss that. Mr. Rosa, Mr. Pauly's recommendation was?
Mr. Polly had suggested that the meetings, interview be separate. I can follow up with him on that if, we still have time to decide that. Well,
Let's discuss what the will of the board is there. Mr. Garai.
Well, I believe it would be better to have staff on hand, that way we can all discuss it openly. That's the purpose of it, so if they see something that we're missing, they're gonna work with them every day, we meet once, twice a month, almost every week now, it seems like. But we need their input in a group effort to figure this out, I believe, that's my belief.
So, Mr. Lutz, that discussion would be to include staff both in the interview process and in the deliberative process.
Yeah, I think again, the dividing line is you're not making the final decision in the closed meeting. But in terms of having staff, be there for an interview, staff does attend general closed meetings, Gary, sometimes Joe. So inclusion of additional staff would be allowed. I think the dividing line is making sure you're not making the final decision in the closed meeting itself.
Very good. And my understanding was having staff present for the first interview.
Correct.
And then the second interview then presumably would not include staff.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, that's correct. All right. So clarification of that then. Is there any dissent? Is there anyone that wishes to have a separate interview process for senior staff? Mr. Esslinger, what's your feedback?
As long as they have the ability to express their questions and their concerns to the board at that interview, I don't see a problem why one interview with the staff would be sufficient, would not be sufficient.
Robin, did you say Mr. Polly had a recommendation on that? Your interviews be together or separate?
you recommend they be separate. I can follow up with him on why. I don't remember
I'd
exactly.
be curious to know his reasoning.
We do it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
He may have a real good reason. I'd like to know what his reason was for recommending separate interviews.
Mr. Ludwig.
You had separate interviews. Staff and board can come back, totally different guys than one for the second round.
Sure, right. I suspect that could happen with this in the same interview.
I think maybe what Henry's saying, or what I could see happening is how somebody interacts with everybody and then you get them separately. We can't see how they interact with staff, or it's a column of maybe somebody read it wrong and we can't see that. We can't see that, the dialogue. It's not consistent. Yeah, possibly. And if you have one, we are gonna get to the length of this time of interview. If we come up with a length of time we think for interview, it's 45 minutes or an hour, and if just the person has to go to the second interview, are they kind of emotionally drained and, so.
It makes for a long process and a long day for all.
Well, the process gets longer when you do that, but I think a good question is to ask Polly for this reason. He has worked with both staff and with board of directors. And if I was a staff member, there might be questions I may be intimidated to ask in front of the board of directors. I'm not saying that's in this case, but I think that's definitely a possibility. And then the second thing is that I want to put for school of thought here. He said August 1 and 2, that's a pretty short turnaround to eliminate down, you know what I mean? You might need a little more time, just suggest, it might need a little more time right there. Now, I know that's down to think about that.
We might, and that is going to be germane for discussion in just a moment.
Yeah.
Mr. Tharp, I appreciate you expressing the confusion there, so I think I understand now the will of the board better, that they're expecting this interview process to include the board, the two constituent members of the Government Affairs Committee, and a selection of staff that will participate in the interview process and provide feedback to the board. um, for the first interview. All right. So we have the interview dates. There's a recommendation of August 1st and 2nd, which is a Thursday and a Friday, I do believe. Part of this will revolve around how the board wants to structure the questions that are asked of the applicants. The thought I had was to do the first interview on a Thursday or Friday, have our deliberation. And then the two candidates that are coming back for a second interview, to inform them they were coming back for a second interview, to express that the questions will be regarding their vision for the district, and to give them a weekend to consider how they would structure those responses. Mr. Pauly's recommendation was to do them one day after another. There's also the impact on us. How, where do we reach our fatigue level of making a good decision, and do we need to break in between the two of them? Mr. Roby Rose.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the reasons that Mr. Pauly suggested consecutive days was for people that were traveling. And so if he is to attend the interview process.
That's an excellent consideration. That's a good reason to do them on back-to-back days. Mr. Garai.
If they were selected, if they had to travel and they were selected, couldn't the follow-up interview be done via Zoom?
That'd be in person, I think. In person. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I was a finalist for an interview, I would not want to be doing it via Zoom. I would want to be there. So you're asking them to travel twice. Mr. Clayton.
Could we do the first interviews July 31? With August 1 for interviews, we may want to get together and talk among ourselves and look at those. And then do the finals on August 2nd. Stringing out to 3 days instead of 2. I mean, I get tired of this like everybody else does, but it's a pretty big decision.
There's a question on availability. I believe I am available July 31st. I am not available before. What are the other availabilities of board members? Is there any availability issue on the 31st of July?
I'm good for those 3 days.
So there are a couple ideas there. What is the will of the board here? How do you want to handle it?
Would it, try to piece this together in my mind. Would it be better for everybody if we interviewed on July 31, staff on August 1? Or is that, and then we met and we take 2 on August 1, we get together at the end of the day and discuss the shit with staff and then pick 2? Am I making too much of this?
I think it's getting complicated, John. I think I like August 1st, August 2nd. I mean, it's always, we're here for a job. Let's just get it done. I think people coming into this job are gonna feel the same way. I mean, they're gonna be focused.
So how do you picture the day? I mean, are we gonna give, if we have separate interviews, I think with staff and boards, that what we're,
No, they're gonna be all together.
you're thinking all together?
All together.
All together with the consensus of the board that we took in the last discussion.
And then at the end of the day, August 1, we pick 2. Correct. Bring them back at the end of the day. I mean, I don't know what the right way and wrong way to do this. Just trying to figure it out.
So I would suggest that the interviews need to be completed no later than 3 p.m. Setting aside at least 2 hours for deliberation. At least 2 hours. We may go long anyways, but at least then we're not setting ourselves up for, well, we've got 2 hours and we're starting at 6 p.m.
I do see Mr. Pauly recommends that
we do not set a time limit on our interviews with candidates. I think that's probably a good idea. I don't want to take any time, maybe, I concur with what you're saying, we don't want to be here at midnight. But, I kind of hate to limit these, having sat through some of the last interviews, boy, they were pretty intense. I sat there and through 2 or 3 of these interviews, I'm thinking, if it was me, I think I'd hit it for the door. Yeah, they were tough.
They are intense, and they're intense for us as well. We have to be focused on what we're hearing. So August 1st, August 2nd, it probably has us starting at 8 a.m. on the 1st of August, having an hour for lunch, hopefully completing all of the interviews before 3 p.m. and then conferring with staff and our committee members, our constituent committee members, and narrowing the selection down to 2. And then bringing them back the following day. So Mr. Clayton had an idea there, and I am interested if there's anyone who thinks that that is a better idea. All right, I'm not really hearing that, so. But all, you know, all ideas presented are valuable. All right, so what I'm hearing is scheduling it for August 1st and 2nd, back to back. Full day on the 1st. And then schedule to be determined for the 2nd. Interview length, Mr. Pauly's recommendation was not to have a fixed length. Previous process, we had a fixed length. You had, I don't remember the number of questions, but there were a number of questions. And you had, I believe it was 30 minutes to answer the questions. You got to answer as long as you wanted on any question, but at the end of 30 minutes, your interview process was complete. Mr. Ludwig.
I assume that these candidates have a scheduled hour for their interview, right? 1 to 8.
Yes, they'll be scheduled.
So if we go along and start the first 2 guys and the guy that's supposed to be here at 10 doesn't get interviewed till the afternoon. You've got to kind of. You've got some kind of time limit.
So I like the idea of shaping them to be 45 minutes. With the expectation at the end of an hour, we're done. But then our expectation is that we will have structured it in a way that the interview should complete in 45 minutes.
I believe that a good answer is a concise answer. Across all the points that they want me to know, and with no flaw. Mr. Lutz, is there any issue with not setting time limits?
There isn't, you know, your ultimate goal is you don't want to discriminate against someone by virtue of being a protected class. In those respects, and I think interview timelines generally aren't going to be a problem there. Unless you just have one where you just sit there and interview for 5 minutes and got rid of them.
Mr. Tharp, do you have a recommendation on structure? The actual interview, like who asks questions or how do you?
Yes. So all people should be asked the same question. We should come up with a list of questions beforehand. There is a question of whether we distribute those questions to the candidates beforehand. But Mr. Pauly recommends that each board member going around and asking a question.
And given that we're going to have staff and constituent members as well, it probably makes sense to involve them. And for an EBID member to be asking a question that's more pertinent to an EBID member, and for us to be asking questions that are more pertinent to governors, Mr. Tharp.
What about just having one person?
So that
Facilitate it for all interviews, that way we can stay on track and keep moving.
that is what we did last time. I don't know that Mr. Pauly had a recommendation on that. We had just discussed it amongst ourselves. So in our discussion amongst ourselves, we tended to land on let's split the question put the questions up amongst the board members, with the idea being that the person is being interviewed by the entire board, not by a person. That said, I've done this once. I don't really know the right way. I just know what we did do.
I think I would like it if just one person did it, just to stay consistent and keep things moving.
The one person asked all the questions.
Yeah, whether that's an outside person or whoever it is. I know there's people that do that.
Mr. Esslinger asked if, Mr. Pauly would be a good candidate for
Yeah,
that.
somebody
Yes,
like
he
that,
would.
yeah.
He'd be very good at it.
Just so we could get the feel, the same feel for everybody. Well, We might that's a all good point, point, because if the staff wants to ask some questions, it'd be nice if one person asks it, so that way the potential person doesn't know who asked that question. Where it came from, maybe.
Right. Or it's not attributed to that individual at least.
Right.
That's an excellent point.
That's kind of my thought.
Other thoughts? The direction of the board that we ask Mr. Pauly if he will be the individual to conduct the interviews.
I think so.
Okay. So the next piece was the questions.
Yes.
And what we're not going to do is go over the questions today, but we just want to try to understand the structure of them. Mr. Sloan,
Real quick, we doing are we gonna do 45 minutes with an hour to like set these guys' times up? Can we decide that?
oh, that's a good question. So expect it, structure the interviews so that they should last no more than 45 minutes and have an hour in between each candidate. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 1, 2, et cetera.
Greg, do we have an idea right now how many, I know somebody had
The
a
expectation is we will have 5 candidates.
5, yeah. Okay. So an hour, 45 minutes is, that's why we met. If you remember last time, we made them short because it's like about 10 or 12 people. And
So getting it through in the day, correct?
yes, you gotta get through the day. So, okay. Just a point of thought.
Is there any opposition to that idea? Structuring them to 45 minutes with enough flex, they could go an hour. All
I think
right,
I'd like to hear Mr. Pauly's input on that
okay.
before we make a decision, but I mean. I think I can live with it, I'm curious what his reason is for not wanting to set a time limit.
So I will mention that all of the things that the board is presenting here and deciding, the committee will be taking back to Mr. Pauly, and the committee will be presenting Mr. Pauly's feedback at our next board meeting.
Good.
This is the first board meeting in June. We're talking about these interviews happening the 1st of August. There's time to adjust this. That said, we want to work a plan and start working that process from here to there.
To get the ball rolling.
So, Mr. Clayton, that's Mr. Pauly's opinion about why to not have a strict time limit.
And would he think the 45 minutes / hour is sufficient?
So I did ask him about that. I didn't ask him about the 45 minutes plus 15, but I did ask him about setting the time limits. And he said that it's better to let candidates say what's really on their mind, and that gives you a better indication. And sometimes their explanations are more in depth and longer. And he said that in his experience, like some of the better candidates take longer to answer.
Mr. Sloan,
If he has to ask the questions, he might look like agree with 45 minutes.
You gotta hate the bill, kid.
all right, questions. We're going to need to come up with a list of questions. The committee needs to understand the process. So we've got board members, EBID constituents, and staff that are going to be present for the interview. Do we want each of those groups to come up with a list of questions that are then compiled into our interview questions? Or do we want them to just come from the board of directors?
Compiled.
Well, I think it'd be good, my opinion is if we get questions for everybody and then the board decides what questions to ask. So I mean, you could get choose that question.
Compile question.
Yeah.
To decide which ones.
You may only choose to pick 2 questions from the staff or something like that, or the board would decide.
Very good. So I would recommend at our next committee meeting for the Government Affairs Committee to have a member of staff there. So that we can work through that process, just in the idea of if we've got senior staff, like what questions do you want to ask the candidates? And they're like, I've got no idea what type of questions to ask. Then somebody has spoken with Mr. Pauly and gotten some foundation about these are the types of interview questions that'll help inform you as an employee of the district about potential management. Mr. Rosa.
President, so the questions that come out of, do you want the committee to compile the questions from staff, from the constituents, and from the committee itself before we take it to the board? I believe that's.
So as much work as we can do at the committee level, we should. I mean, we spent a lot of time on this today because there were questions that we couldn't answer at the committee level. But where we can reduce the workload of the board, we should. All right, the last question was, do we present the candidates with the questions in advance?
I think so.
Mr. Rogan, so I got a yes from Mr. Plato, Mr. Rogan.
Mr. President, Mr. Pauly suggests that he suggests that we do present them with the questions in advance, but if we decide otherwise, then nobody has to have the questions. So it's one or the other.
Yeah.
No in between.
Yeah, Mr. Slum, I kind of go with more, let's give them general topics, so we can look at these questions and kind of see where these topics would be at, and not give them the questions. I want to hear somebody's answer without being rehearsed.
Other thoughts on that? I'm in favor of giving them the questions ahead of time. There's no concerns about the questions leaking or
Yes,
access.
for leaking, number 1, number 2. You're gonna get the real guy when he's working 24/7, not in that snapshot. Some people under pressure may not answer good, but they may be good. Does that make sense to you, James? So I would rather give them the questions and let them think about it methodically and give us a better answer than to start shooting from the hip and maybe not regret what they say.
So what if some guy comes in with a sheet of paper? You're gonna let him bring the paper in? And read from it?
I would.
I mean, that's a question.
It would have.
What would that matter?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, if the guy went to Chat GPT and generated the right answer.
Well, that's a legitimate.
Well, but now, listen,
And
you can ask a good question any day when you're working and get a good answer. Whether you get it from someone else or the knowledge of yourself, I think information and knowledge can be found deep and wide. It don't have to be isolated to a piece of paper for that moment when you're walking. Maybe that guy's really good at asking good questions to people that know good answers. Again, life is full of questions. You just want the right answer, whether it's written down or if it's something that he may have found somewhere along the way, but I still think.
I tend to lean towards what Mr. Lack is expressing. I'm expecting the next manager of the district to be thoughtful. I don't expect him to have to make trigger level decisions, which is what a no prior information interview question is. It's a trigger level decision, like, okay, I've got this, I've got 2 seconds to compile my thoughts and they fire. I'm expecting the next manager to be more thoughtful than that in their decisions, and so it might be better to allow them to be thoughtful in the interview questions. Mr. Rose.
Mr. President, Mr. Sloan's suggestion of sending out topics before, I think is a potentially good happy medium where they know what we're gonna ask, but the exact question, the exact wording of the question is not distributed. Alternatively, we could distribute the questions for the second interview to all candidates beforehand and not to the questions for the first interview. We don't have to send out all the questions.
Yeah, I wouldn't send them to a week ahead of time. I'd send them to a day ahead of time. Give some time to think about it.
Vision for
the district, I think, does take more thought than a day.
I concur with that.
So I do believe that we should send out a second set of questions to all of the candidates, even if they don't eventually make it to that round.
So, you know, thank you for that input, Mr. Rosa. My thought in hearing this, where I am landing is the idea of sending out that second set of questions, and for the first set, this idea of like, okay, here are the questions we're gonna be asking, these are the topics. And allowing them to be reasonably knowledgeable on those topics. Or reasonably prepared to answer questions on those topics. And then also understanding. How well do you react under fire? That there's a benefit to understanding that as well. Thoughts from the board? Mr. Wright?
Shouldn't that happen on the second interview? Give everybody the list for the first interview, the candidates who make it. Do like they're saying there, you know, give them the topic, and then we have a set of questions and see what their responses are.
So that's an alternative suggestion. So my thought on that concurs with Mr. Roby Rosa did. Your vision for the district. I want you to spend some time thinking about that. That's more than just the decision today of do we open this gate or close it? That said, I am not firmly set on any of these ideas. What are your thoughts?
Anybody applying should have a vision for the district, regardless if we're asking that question or not, right? Maybe that's the job.
Well, I would hope.
Yeah,
That's an excellent
exactly.
point.
So that's not something you have to give them time to think about. They need to already have one in place.
Would the board like more time to think about this? Is this a level that you would like to have us go back, discuss further with Mr. Pauly, and then present at our second board meeting this month?
I think that's fair.
Great. Yeah, I think there's some indecision here.
I would love it.
Mr. Roby Rosa, do we have any other questions that the board had, or that the committee had for the board that we haven't addressed?
That is all.
Thank you all for your extensive consideration of that. Usually the committee will have done more work. Obviously, this is the big decision for the board of directors. And so we could get as far as framing the questions. We couldn't get as far as getting the answers. So thank you for your involvement today. Thank you, everyone, for your patience in reviewing that. All right. Let me see what else we have on the agenda. Mr. Esslinger, we have the legislative update and the HR and safety update. Are they brief enough to do before lunch?
Yeah.
Mr. Esslinger.
Mr. President, item 12 is just, it's in your in board packet. They're just updates from Family Farm Alliance, what's been happening through their organization. The other one is the Water Strategies June report on federal movement in Washington DC, and both of those are just for your reading pleasure. Item 13, HR safety, it's in your packet. We have currently 79 employees. We're still trying to find a service mechanic. They're hard to find. We've hired a temporary general office clerk in engineering and a temporary water records clerk for our irrigations. She's in our water records department. We have 4 employees that have been with us over 30 years. 13 employees that have been with us between 21 and 30 years. 14 employees that have been with us between 10 and 20 years. And 49 employees that have been with us just under 10 years. Juan Jimenez, he's the one that fabricates everything in our In our fabrication shop, he's been with us 10 years and it's his anniversary this year. Also years of service, Joa has been with us 1 year in the executive department. Irrigation systems, I have 4 irrigation system operators. Sergio Salinas, 29 years. Mike Gomez, 23 years. Willie Pereira Jr., 3 years, and Oscar Miranda, 1 year. And then in maintenance, Willie Herrera Senior, he's been with us 28 years. In our SCADA system, we have Armando Alejo, 17 years, Armando Carrillo, 17 years. So lots of good employees working for us with a lot of experience and knowledge. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Esslinger. Before we reset for lunch, is there anyone present who is an applicant or a protestant for any of the suspension and transfer items we have on the agenda? Madam Secretary, would you verify that there's no one online?
Mr. President, I'm here on behalf of one of the applicants.
Thank you. Ms. Barncastle, do you have an issue with us conducting the suspension and transfer hearing after lunch?
No, I don't.
All right, is there anybody else that is a applicant or protestant?
No, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. If there's no opposition from the board, we will recess for lunch and we will reconvene at 12:45 to do the and move into closed session. Is there any opposition to that? Hearing none, we are at recess. Going back. We are back from recess. Mrs. Solpeck, are you present?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, very good. Paige, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. Thank you for your patience. We are to the suspension and transfer hearing. So I call to order the board sitting to hear suspension and transfer applications. All board members are present with the exception of Mr. Colquitt. The board is convened to act upon applications by landowners in the district to transfer water rights pertinent to lands within the district, which are not suitable for irrigation or capable of being properly irrigated to other lands within the district. These applications are filed under section 73-13-4 of the New Mexico statutes. This board will decide if, within their judgment, the other lands within the district may be profitably and advantageously irrigated. The applicants are identified as listed in Exhibit A. I'll give you just a moment. I want to get to that exhibit. The applicants were required to publish notice in any newspaper published within Doñana County of EBID taking action to consider a resolution allowing the transfer. The publication should have listed the time and place of this meeting, listed the action to be taken by this board, listed the description of the move to and move from lands, and listed the reason for the requested transfer. Does staff have a copy of the notice of publication?
Yes, sir, we do.
Were all of the required points in the publication?
Yes, sir.
Was the last publication date made prior to this hearing?
Yes, sir, it was.
We will now proceed with presentation by staff. After that, the board members can ask questions of staff.
Good afternoon. We have 3 water transfers to present to you today. First one is 2024 WTS 007 1150 Country Club Road LLC is transferring 14.06 water righted acres to Salapec 6U Farms, Inc. If approved, 1150 Country Club Road LLC will remain with 6.77 water rights, and Salapec 6U Farms will have a new total of 159.52 water righted acres. Second one we have is 2024 WTS 008 EPT Tamar Land LLC is transferring 19.33 water righted acres to Culver LP. If approved, EPT Tamar Land LLC will no longer have water rights, and Culver LP will have a new total of 111.09. Third one and final one we have is 2024 WTS 009. Doris Reed is transferring 0.87 water righted acres to Gabriel Lucetto. If approved, Mrs. Reed will no longer have water rights, and Mr. Lucetto will have a new total of 2.87 water righted acres. Staff recommends approval on all three.
Thank you. Are there questions from the board of staff on their presentation? Hearing none. At this point in time, the board will take evidence and testimony from the applicants or their representatives or any persons who are here to protest the applications. We will proceed with any presentation by the applicants. After that, the board members and EBID staff can ask questions of the applicants. Would the applicants or their representatives introduce themselves? Are there any protestants who wish to speak? If so, please identify yourselves for the record. Are there any other comments?
There's a question.
Mr. Glacial.
The 1150 Country Club Road, what is it? Looks like some kind of racetrack or something.
That's Weatherly's enforcement, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? The chair will now entertain a motion to have a resolution to approve or disapprove the applications.
I make a motion to approve all three applications.
I have a motion from Mr. Rosa to approve all three applications, seconded by Mr. Tharp, with the resolution number being 2024 S&T 06. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes 7-0 unanimously. I will ask that the resolution be formalized as called for by section 73-13-5 of the Mexico statutes, and that the secretary of the board immediately certify and file with the state engineer a true copy of the resolution and action of the board. If there are any protestants who disagree with the action of the board, you may appeal this decision directly to the district court as provided under section 73-13-4 of the New Mexico statutes. The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn the board sitting to hear the applications.
Move to adjourn the board to hear the application.
I have a motion from Mr. Rosa, seconded by Mr. Garai to adjourn the board sitting to hear the applications for suspension and transfer. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously, and we are adjourned as a suspension
Thank
and
you.
transfer board. Thank you very much. All right. We get back to the agenda. That concludes the open portion of today's agenda. We do have closed session items to discuss. I will accept a motion to go into closed session to discuss those items.
That's on.
I have a motion for Mr. Garai to go into closed session to discuss the agenda items. seconded by Mr. Rosa. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. We are in closed session. We are now back in open session. I will note that no items were discussed in closed session other than those covered in the motion to go into closed session, which were the items listed on the agenda. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr.
Second.
Garai, seconded by Mr. Glacial to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. We are adjourned.